the cloud as well. And I'm going to go ahead and check the attendees and see if I see anybody who is a member. I'm going to promote, let's see, Schroeder,
Where's Peter?
Dan Gustansek. I'm going to promote him. Dan Gustansek, he has been promoted. And Reese Schroeder.
Are you going to promote them as their presentations come up, or just everyone who's going to present?
I'm going to bring in everybody of that particular item.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
All right, Peter, we have not officially started the meeting yet.
Hey, I know, it's fine. It's another one of those, what can go wrong will go wrong.
It has gone wrong.
Now, Peter, do you know if Reese is, I do not see her among the attendees.
Reese is a he.
Oh, Reese, thank you, Schroeder.
I don't see them either, Daphne.
Yeah, I'm not seeing them.
All right, why don't we start the meeting and then I'll communicate with Hank to see who needs to come on.
There's a message in the chat says Joel Bargman will be talking instead of Reese.
So it's Joe.
It's in the Q&A. Bargman, B-A-R-G-M-A-N-N, like Nancy.
Okay, I will promote him. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
All right, Peter, we are recording if you want to start.
Hey, good evening. This is our public hearing for the Community Preservation Committee for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. Before I begin, I'm required under the Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, to read what we call a remote meeting script. So I am Peter Pingator. I am the chair of the CPC. Let me confirm, first of all, that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. So members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Paul Alpert.
Here.
Joe Barnes.
Here.
Artie Crocker.
Here.
Bob Dermody.
Here.
Laura Dorfman.
Here.
Chris Gersel.
Here.
Penny Kirk.
Here.
And Rick Zimbo.
Here.
Okay, and our staff members, Karis Lustig.
Here.
And Kristen Wright. Can you hear me, Kristen? Can you hear?
I'm sorry, I said here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That's okay.
Daphne is behind the scenes, but you can hear us, right, Daphne? If
Yes,
you
I
can't
can.
If you can't hear us, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is an open meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. It's being conducted remotely pursuant to Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of the coronavirus outbreak. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded, so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. this meeting is a public meeting, and so the public will be invited to participate by Zoom. We're convening by Zoom app. You can follow the app. The app link is posted on our town website, and it identifies how the public may join. The meeting is being recorded. Some attendees are participating by video conference. Please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and you should take care not to screen share your computer, and anything that you do broadcast may be captured by the recording. All of our supporting materials have been provided to members of this body. They're available on the website. They were posted prior to tonight's meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. And I think we're going to hew pretty closely to that agenda. I will note otherwise if we vary from it. Before we turn to the first item, let me cover some ground rules. I will introduce each speaker. Actually, let's talk about it, and I'll do this slightly differently. This is our public hearing for the community preservation applications for funding for the fiscal year 2022. There are 8 applications that are currently under review, along with a proposal by the CPC committee itself to increase the amount of CPC funds appropriated to the Community Housing Restricted Funds Reserve account from 11% to 22%. That is all very much inside baseball to those of you who don't regularly participate in these meetings. But the presenter on that proposal, I think, will unpack that statement and make it clear to everyone. Here we are procedurally where we're at as a committee is applications come in December. They're assigned to liaisons. Liaisons have been responsible for due diligence, if you will. Written questions have been propounded, answers have been given. The proponents, the applicants, have made presentations to this committee. The committee, through its chair, has met with the select board. We will also be meeting with the FinCom. We are having our public hearing for public comment and tonight. And then after that, we will vote. And if we vote in favor of any or all of whatever the applications are that we vote in favor of, they are presented at town meeting, and town meeting members ultimately are the deciders on each of these applications. The way we'll proceed tonight is we'll have the liaisons introduce each application, and then the proponent will make a presentation. After the proponent completes his or her presentation, I'll ask the committee members if they have any questions or comments. For the viewing public, don't be surprised if there are very few. Understand that we've been with these applications for a number of months, and we've had an opportunity to ask a lot of questions going up to tonight's public hearing. So it is primarily here for the public to ask questions. So once I finish going through the committee and asking them if they have any questions or comments, we're going to turn it over to the public, and then you can ask questions or make comments, and we will proceed in sequential order with each of the applications. When you do, for both the presenters and members of the public and committee members, please make sure that you identify yourself by name. Ideally, I would prefer if members of the public identify themselves by name and address. Always helpful. And for members of our committee, please remember to mute your phone or your computer or your phone if you're not speaking. And for any response, just wait until in order for clarity of the record, let's not talk over each other. Let's wait until I complete my statement or you complete your statement before we proceed. Every vote we take tonight, if there are any, yeah, there will be by roll call per the applicable emergency statute. Okay, so with that, we're going to start with FY 2201, and that is the Emery Grover addition, renovation and addition project. And we will have one of the liaisons, either there are two for this project, and that is Joe Barnes and Bob Germany. We'll have one of them make an introduction of what the project is, and then we'll turn it over to the presenters to make a presentation. Okay. Bob, all right, Joe.
Start again here. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Bob and I have spoken, and he's going to be pulled in a number of different directions tonight, so I'm going to introduce our speakers. We welcome Dr. Dan Gudican, Superintendent of Schools, and Joel Bargman, who I think represents the architectural firm that will be working with Dan and the town for the project. So this is, as you said, 2201, the Emery Grover renovation addition project. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. And I want to thank the CPC for letting me join you this evening. Thanks for all of your hard work and really for possibility of what I think is a very exciting project for the town of Needham. I think it's an exciting project because the Emery Grover renovation really will honor, if it's successful, the history, the community, the unique architecture, and frankly, the people of this community in at least a few ways. First of all, there's no question that this project and this renovated building will make a statement about the community's commitment and to the value of its children. And further, it'll be a visible sign of Needham's deep and long-lasting support for and belief in education. The project also will help anchor the downtown area on Highland Avenue and define that area as well. I can't imagine driving down Highland Avenue with nothing on that site if that building had to be torn down. And across the street, aside from our longtime neighbors, the funeral homes, essentially a strip mall across the street. So having Emery Grover renovated in that area, I think will keep a more traditional and classical feel to that part of downtown. And then finally, the juxtaposition of school administration in the center of town makes a statement about the importance of it, and also its positioning near town hall and other town services, and as a matter of convenience and as a noted building for the public, I think will be powerful and important. For those reasons and many others, I'm very pleased, I'm honored that the CPC, Mr. Dermody, Dr. Barnes have worked with us and walked through this process, and we look forward to continuing to work with CPC for the potential of some funding to help get this project off the ground. And with that, I'd ask Joel Bargman to perhaps take you through a brief overview of what this project would be all about.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to present this historic property to the town. We'll go through it very quickly. I know we have about 5 minutes. This is a result of 18 months of study. The final report was submitted to the town June of 2020. Emery Grover was constructed in 1897 as a town high school, served as a junior high school from 1923 until 29. And then in 1947, it became the home of the Needham School Administration Building. So it's been a long residence that school admin has been in that building. In 1987, the building was recognized as historic and placed on the National Register. The Emery Grover building began with a donation of land by William Mosley. It was designed by an architectural firm, Whitman and Hood, and built by F.G. Colburn, well-known local architects and contractors. The building was named for the Honorable Judge Emery Grover, who was a selectman and school committee member in Needham. The building represents the only example of Renaissance revival architecture in Needham, and it served, as Dan mentioned, the gateway into Needham town center for over 120 years, and we think makes a very nice complement to the restoration of the town hall. We're fortunate to have access to historic drawings. You can see the complexity of the renovation by virtue of the white boxes in the middle that are structure and air heating risers through the building that are being overcome in this renovation. The first floor is here. It's accessed by a set of monumental stairs from Island Avenue with flanking porticos on the north and the south. We think that they were the boys and the girls entries, obviously in the old days. Ascending the stairs to the second floor led students to additional classrooms and a large auditorium. The north classrooms remain mostly intact and is used as a conference room today. So that's the one on the left, the school committee room. And then the third floor was designed as dark rooms for different classes. This floor is actually not in use. The floor was condemned in 1935 as structurally insufficient and remains so today, being used for just limited access. The value of the building is integral to its integration in the Needham town fabric. Recognized by the town, efforts to protect it culminated in acceptance, as I mentioned, in the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. As is often the case with 120-year-old buildings, the infrastructure has declined over the decades. Existing building systems, including life safety systems, are non-functioning, outdated, or missing. Sprinkler systems, for example, missing. The original slate roof continues to leak, and you can see the trash barrels on the third floor collecting rainwater leaks through the roof. The stairs, there is no vertical elevator in the building. The stairs are the circulation, so it's not handicapped accessible. The stairs are in poor condition. You see, they have to be held up by a secondary structure. The ventilation is extremely poor. The fresh air intakes are antiquated at best. The Highland Avenue School, built next to the north of Emery Grover in 1924, was demolished in 1984 for other development. Emery Grover may likely suffer the same fate without preservation. The efforts to continue the building as a school administration department require significant work, which comes at a cost. The cost to continue Emery Grover includes obligation to comply with historic guidelines of Needham and state and federal guidelines outlined by the Secretary of Interior Department, Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation. The recommended solution is to renovate the front building and to add an addition onto the back at 90 degrees to the front of the building. This has been reviewed by the planning board, the school committee, and has been the recommended direction to move forward with. This is illustrated in this slide, along with 42 parking spaces. New entry, this rear corner is such to make the building fully accessible to those that may have a physical disability. On the left, the basement level of Emery Grover houses back of house functions. The second floor has those public accessible meeting spaces, and the third floor has more destination spots. Obviously, we'll enforce floor, the third floor that's currently not usable. Half from the town of Needham is here to talk about a slight adjustment that's been made to the schedule. Hank? Maybe he's not on. The difference on the schedule is the desire is that design funds for at least phase one of design would be approved at the May town meeting in 2021, so coming up in May. And then the second series of design funds and construction funds would be allocated in May of 2022. The idea is that Hillside Prep would be undertaken right after town meeting a year from now, allowing the school administration to get into Hillside Renovated, which is their swing space that they would be going into when they have to vacate Emery Grover for new construction. And the nice part of this schedule is that we're able to move school administration over the winter holidays, Christmas holidays, when it's least disruptive for them to move in, out. And then we can start Emery Grover in January of 2023 and move that schedule up a little bit from what had been presented previously. So the closing, sorry for that little glitch there. Appreciate the opportunity to present this, the preferred plan, and hope that we have answered any questions, and at this point, open it up back to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. I'll turn this back to the chair. Thank you.
Okay, and does that conclude the presentation by the proponents?
It does.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Informative, and we've seen it before, and it's still a delight. Are there any questions from our committee members? I won't go in alphabetical order because I'm just assuming that we probably have very few. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand physically or raise your hand using the app. No questions. All right. So let's turn it over to the public. And Daphne, do we have any members of the public who have questions or comments?
At this moment, there are no hands raised. Oh, there's one hand raised. I will. Okay. John Lehorn, I'm going to promote him as a panelist. Mr. Leghorn, please unmute.
Well, unmute. More importantly, I need to like congratulate my surrogate niece, Karis Lustig, on her appointment as director of DPW. I've known Karis since she was born. Congratulations. And I would like to offer my full support for this attempt at preservation of an historic building. So you can expect my support when we're at town meetings. So all of you take care, stay safe, and looking at you, get your vaccines. You too, Chris.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for joining us. Okay.
Mr. Chair, you have another, I'm going to promote him.
Okay, we can.
And it's Steve Rosenstock.
Steve Rosenstock.
Good evening. I apologize. I came in late, had another appointment that I was running from. Did you guys discuss what percentage of this renovation was going to be CPC funded and what percentage was going to be town funded?
We did not.
Do you have an estimate of what the amount is that would qualify for historic rehab and what would be new construction and need to be funded?
We do. So I assume you have a second part of that question for what the committee's position is, but I'm going to let the proponents answer that question, and then we can go from there. Okay, Steve? Okay, Hank, I'm gonna have Hank Half answer that question.
Well, as was reported in the detailed report, I think it's chapter 16, eligible amounts would be about $12 million of the total construction. And that would be both hard and soft costs. The full details are in the report, and the report is on the town school department website.
I think it, okay, Hank, is that it?
Yeah, and then the committee has, I know, had other discussions, and I'll let you get into that, Peter.
We'll get into that. So that, I think the number actually, Steve, is the total number, I think, is $12.6 million. All right, your next question.
Then how much is going to be paid out of the town debt service?
That's not my, I can't answer that question, right? That's not my lane. But if you were asking us what is, I I can tell you that we've had a discussion about what the commitment is from the CPC. We haven't voted on it yet, but in an effort at facilitating a discussion between the various boards that are involved in this question, we took a sense of the committee and I think actually sent a memo both to FinCom and the select board, a town manager and the school committee and the superintendent. The sense of the committee is that we would fund 25% of the total project cost. And that would be $6 million. And the total amount, yes, yeah, wait, can I finish?
Well, I think that you're not getting to what I believe is Mr. Rosenstock's question, because nobody has mentioned what the full cost is. I believe he's trying to determine what percentage of the cost is eligible for CPC and what percentage of the total cost of the project is not eligible for CPC.
Why don't we let him ask the questions? All right, so
Okay.
Steve,
Can I ask a question? What is the total cost estimated to be by the proponents of this proposal? And of that, you've already said that even though 12 million might qualify, the committee's thinking that they're only going to fund about half of that 12. So now, and that 12 might be 25% of the total cost. So most of it's being. No, Steve, let's go to the total cost. Let me cut through this. The total cost is roughly $27 million. Is that correct, Hank? Yes. Eligible funding for it by CPC, total number is 12.6 million. We've had a sense of the committee in order to facilitate discussion between the various committees. And the sense of this committee has been that we would commit to, and that equals basically about 25% or 50%. We would commit to 25%, or in dollars, total dollars, $6 million. Which is not 25%.
It's a little bit less than 25%, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
There are no more hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Any further questions or comments on 2201? Okay. All right, let's move on to 2202 then. Thank you, Dr. Gudenkantz, and thank you, Hank.
Thank you.
The next application is 2202, Preservation of Town of Needham Marriage Records. That happens, I am the liaison on that project. That is a request for funding to preserve marriage records from 1919 forward. And the request is to preserve them through scanning, uploading them, and onto an electronic format. And we will have, the request is by the town clerk's office. The total amount is $25,000, and we'll have Teddy Eaton make a presentation concerning the request.
Thank you. Karis, I too want to congratulate you. I think that's a wonderful move for you, and I think you'll do a great job. And I have one more question. Do you have the pictures to show when we get, thank you, because I couldn't figure out how to get that online at home.
Not a problem. Just let me know when you want me to put them up.
I will, thank you. So to begin, I would like to thank the Community Preservation Committee for its past support of a previous project dating back to 2011, in which the Community Preservation Committee approved the restoration of mostly original pre-1900 birth, marriage intentions, death certificates, and pauper records of the 1800s that for some reason of which I'm not aware were never incorporated into annual volumes, as well as 1700 to 1800 vital records found in an old wooden box located in the town hall lower level vault. At the time, CoFile, the vendor, had restored, deacidified, and rebound many of our earliest books. To date, we, the town clerk's office, has restored close to 30 of our town books and vital ledger volumes out of the town clerk's annual budget. We have one picture, Kara's the first one with the the volumes on the table. Could you show that? The cost then of this project was approximately $30,000. This photograph includes original birth, marriage, and death certificates from 1800 to 1900, plus several miscellaneous records dating back to the 17 and 1800s, as well as digital negative originals of these vital records. Other restored documents include early records of town meeting, elections, and Board of Selectmen, as they were called then, minutes. The second photo is a comparison of the town's first two volumes before they were restored and after they were restored. These are volume 1 and volume 1 and 2, 1701 to 1801, and the volume 1 and 2, the two combined, is a transcript of those from the same time frame. And the third photograph is a photo of the wooden box, which contained many loose envelope and after envelope of loose vital records. Those have all been restored and bound, as you could see from the first picture. Thank you, Karis. The current proposal is somewhat different in scope. City and town clerks are the agents for the Massachusetts State Department of Vital Statistics and the recipients of their community's vital records. After many years of underfunded budgets, this State Department was finally able to begin the process of creating a statewide electronic program of the state's births beginning in 2011 and death records beginning in 2014. This meant that city and town clerks statewide could certify copies for their residents. Each city and town retain the original vital record, which we currently bind annually, and now we enclose them since 2000 in Mylar sleeves for a more permanent protection. Because the State Department of Vital Statistics is currently working with both the current birth and death records and are working backwards at the same time, there is no plans at the present to begin work on the state's marriage records. This year's request is to scan, index, and digitize the marriage records of the town of Needham from 1919 to approximately 1970. These records will be uploaded onto a content management system where we can then create certified copies of the original documents without going to our antiquated index card system or to the original certificates. Karis, I do have a picture, perhaps a black and white one, of the marriage volumes. Do you have that? Did you say you did have it?
Yep, just one moment.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. It's sideways. If you look at that photo, the upper shelf in the town clerk's office are the marriage records bound by year beginning in 1919. They're not in the greatest condition, and those are the ones we hope to have scanned and uploaded into a content management system. We've received a combined estimate from two reliable firms under state contract to conduct this work. I've attached the general code image data graphic to show how these two vendors work together to ensure the success of this part of the project. Karis, do you have that one also? Yes, thank you. This graphic depicts to some degree the process of moving from a paper-based environment to a digital platform like the state's birth and death electronic system. The goal of the project is to protect the historical significance of the records by minimizing the number of times these records are handled by staff as well as the potential for damage due to fire, flood, or some other natural disaster. The software will enable immediate access to the records, which will help ensure a high level of customer care for those who need legal documents, reducing the amount of time needed to fulfill this task. This new software will allow staff to enter marriage records directly into the system. The projected cost of the project are based on the Laserfiche configuration detail in the proposal, not in. Can you wait 1 second? My apologies. The projected total cost of the project is based on the Laserfiche configuration detailed in the proposal, not including any of the options listed, as well as the backfile cost for the work image data and general code will be doing to scan, index, process, and upload the marriage records into the repository. The costs are approximately $25,000, backfile being 12.5 and Laserfiche being 12.8. The annual Laserfiche software maintenance fee, which would begin in the second year moving forward based on the configuration in the proposal, will be $1,500 and will be incorporated into the town clerk's annual budget. The initial work is to be done by general code and image data. However, going forward, the town clerk staff will be able to enter marriage certificates into the software program, which will keep the marriage records of the town electronically updated, as well as the retention of the original marriage certificates. That's pretty much it. If I can answer any questions, I would be happy to do so. I would also certainly invite you to come look at some of the records we've had.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Teddy. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments for our town clerk? Okay, so now, Daphne, do we have any members of the public who want to make comments or ask questions?
There are no hands raised at this moment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, so with that, we will close out discussion on 2201. And thank you, Teddy.
Thank you.
And again, thank you once again for carrying us through these difficult times. You know, the fact that you've been there.
We have an upcoming election.
I know, but you've been there every single day, and it's an inspiration and a reassurance to all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good night.
All right. Okay, we'll move on to 2204. And that is Town Common, Historic Redesign and Beautification. Our liaisons are Bob Dermody and Chris Gersel, one of whom will introduce Ed Olson, and it looks like it's Chris. You're on, Chris.
That is correct. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to give a brief description and then yield my time to Mr. Edward Olson. But this project is requesting $1,364,000 for the construction of the Town Common Redesign and Beautification project. The Town Common has been long used for a gathering spot for the community. This reconstruction will focus on making this space beautiful as well as functional. The area in the project includes the green space between the southern curb line of Garrity Way to the curb line of Great Plain Ave, to the south and from the curb line of Chapel Street to the Highland Avenue. Garrity Way and the parking area are not included in this project. The town completed an internal design process for the Town Common and drafted a scope of services which includes improved hardscape, landscaping, amenities, tree plantings, and utility upgrades that are consistent with the historic nature of the common and the new downtown streetscape improvement project. This project will install new sod, trees, plantings, low maintenance hardscape materials, and increase handicap accessibility. The pathways and the landscaping will be adjusted to become more aesthetically pleasing and functionally enhanced. There will be increased electrical and sound capacity to accommodate town-wide events. So if it pleases the committee, Mr. Chair, I'd like to recognize Ed Olson, Superintendent for Park and Forestry, to give a little bit deeper description of the scope of this project.
That's great. Thanks, Chris, and welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, members of the CPC. I'm Edward Olson, Superintendent of Parks and Forestry, and I appreciate the support I've received through the years from CPC. I've been involved in a lot of really great projects, but I'll be honest with you, this one is kind of the shining gem as far as I'm concerned. As I've mentioned at town meeting in years past, this is what I consider truly our front yard of our community, the town common. It reflects really our community and our love of green space. So a little bit in the background on this project, this common renovation project has been discussed for many years. As I started my career 11 years ago almost in Needham, we were renovating Town Hall. During that renovation, we used the common as laydown space where we had trailers and different equipment and materials that were laid down in this common space. Years after that, the common was used as a laydown space for the streetscape project, as Chris mentioned. We were kind of in between these two projects, but now it's time for the town common itself. And as you all probably know and can see, that the commons changed over the last couple of years, especially with COVID and how it's been used and utilized and how we've kind of utilized and rethought how we use our green space in general in town. So I'm really proud of the work of the working group that I had assembled for this this design. I'm really proud of the design by Beta Engineering. And we started working in July. And I think one of the reasons why we had such great success in outside the box thinking is we had a really good team involved. When I look at the members of our working group, we had liaisons from disabilities, historical, planning board, design review, town manager's office, select board, really a little bit of everybody, some downtown merchants. So really that diverse group gave us a real interesting mix of opinions on how we're going to use this space. So I'm excited to present tonight the design that we came up with from Beta Engineering. And I believe Kristen's going to help me share that in a second here. So thank you. All right. So the first slide is really the common today. And I'll be honest with you all. When I thought about this design many years ago with Karis and Rick Merson and Tony Delgazo and others, we had a lot of ideas and we had a lot of interesting discussions about the space and what we could do here. And that's what you see. That's our as-built, as you can see. Right now we have kind of a mishmash of tree plantings. Some trees we've had to remove because of the impact of the streetscape project. Other trees like the blue tree, when I first took over, unfortunately, I had to take that tree down. We replaced that tree. But really, when we look at this picture here, we look at a design that's kind of a little bit unoriented. You know, the trees don't really have rhyme or reason as to where they are, other than they were planted when trees came down. We planted new trees. So as we go to the next slide, you can kind of see how far we came with the thought process and where we went with this design. And again, I'm so proud of this design. Every time I've shared this with groups, most recently with the select board, early winter of 2020, it's been favorably received. And I think that is a testimony to the hard work that was put into this work. So you can see with this picture, circular walkway, closest to Garrity Way. The circle within the circle would be the tent set up every year. I think that's been a big hit with COVID. I think what we've heard is people have really appreciated that open space, being able to get takeout downtown, enjoy that picnic table set situation and setting out there. And it's just beautiful to see people out there at night enjoying our space. And then you can see the legs into the common circle walkway. So we've got a curvilinear feel as you come in off of Highland Ave and Chapel Street, closest to Garrity Way. And then you have the two openings off of Great Plain Ave. Thank you, Kristen. And again, as we talk about open space and appreciation of open space, we discussed the tree planting. I think that was a big part of this design discussion, was trying to get the trees back to the common. So we're almost tripling the amount of trees that are on the common now. And the thought was to have large shade trees by Great Plain Avenue so that shade can provide some buffer from the hot sun in the summertime, as well as having flowering interest trees along both edges of the park, as well as finally along the edge of Garrity Way, having statement showpiece kind of columnar aesthetic trees that will really frame the hall, especially when you're looking at it from the blue tree. All right, next slide, please. Excuse me. So again, this slide kind of depicts a lot of the things, a lot of the the accoutrements that Chris mentioned in his great intro. So one thing you'll notice is a lot of seating opportunities, benches around the outside of the walkway, seat walls where people can sit down by Garrity Way, picnic tables, swing benches. So really a lot of opportunities for people to stretch out, relax, stay a while, and enjoy the space. In addition, you'll see the Circle of Peace has been situated a little bit differently, but it will be moved, it will be cleaned, and then it'll be reorientated. But essentially, it's in the same spot. The bus shelter will be in the same spot. And what you see on east and west side of this design is a continuity of design. So again, you have the swing bench, the picnic table under the pergola on both sides, as well as flowering trees and shade trees that will mimic each other on each side. And I think that's the major points from this slide. Thank you, Kristen. You know, I really like this slide. And again, I give credit to Beta. This design effort was really, really fun for me, for the team. And the depictions of the visuals were just amazing. When I look at this and see how realistic this could look, and it's fun to see this in design. And then 3 years later, after construction, you say, wow, that's really what we got out there. And I've seen that now for 10 years. It's kind of cool. So again, as I mentioned before, in the foreground by the flagpole, we have the large elm trees that harkens back to over 100 years ago. The elm trees lined the common. So this is kind of a historical feel and look of the common. You'll also notice the flowering trees as mentioned on the two sides of the common. And it really looks like hopefully a normal, typical day sometime in the future for us here. Next slide, please. So really another angle, another perspective view. So again, this is from Great Plain Avenue. You can see in the foreground are the new accoutrements that were taken, that they were part of the streetscape project. Thank you, Kristen, for pointing that out. So that exists today, the flagpole, the low seat wall, the planters. So really this is tying in the streetscape project into the common and making it whole again. You know, I mentioned laydown space. So in addition to being the laydown space for a couple big projects downtown, the town hall as well as streetscape, the common's showing signs of age. The irrigation system, I joked earlier in an earlier meeting, I believe was done on a bar napkin by Johnny Cusick about 60 years ago. But it needs help. The soil is degrading. A lot of the talk nowadays is stormwater. So again, trying to regrade this common space, replant it, capture the stormwater, and really get it the accoutrements of the 21st century, including, as Chris mentioned, the lighting, the uplighting of the common walkways and elsewhere, the ability to uplight the building and shine different colored lights on the building for events. And the sound, I think that's a big step. To have the ability to have sound on the common for major events is going to be a huge upgrade. Next slide, please. So this is another perspective view. As I mentioned before, on the east and west side, this kind of shows the open air pergola, the shade structure with the swing bench, the handicap accessible picnic table, as well as you span to the right, you'll see the tent set up. As we talked about in the circle within a circle, that would be a seasonal setup, much like we saw this past year, where we'll take the tent down in the winter months, put it back up, spring, summer, fall to enjoy the good weather. And you also see the Adirondack chairs. That was part of the design. Flexibility, so if people wanted to go out there, move those chairs, they have the ability to pick them up, bring them wherever they want in that great lawn space, the open lawn space. And again, you can see the uplighting along the walkway, which will really give the common a nice, safe feel at night. And I think it will give it a nice aesthetic appeal as well. Next slide, please. And I love this, although the blue tree seems to be a little off center with the flagpole, but that's just logistics out there. I can't get too nitpicky, but I love the depiction of people out in the common enjoying the space, much like we've seen it over the past year. a gathering spot, families, kids, Adirondack chair use, the seat wall, passive recreation. I can see people already using this for a spot downtown to get some laps in, much as we see at Memorial, as well as the Phaseo track. So really, as I mentioned, I just see this as a beautiful front lawn of the community. And most importantly, in this depiction, you see the central point, which is the blue tree by Great Plain Avenue. Next slide, please. So again, you see the uplighting, the Adirondack chairs, another view of the common. I made a joke earlier that we'll straighten out those light dark line stripes in the lawn there. We don't want any bend lines out there. We want to have some nice straight lines. And I think that's really it. You see the theme of the common as we spin around here. Next slide, please. I like this slide because again, it shows the elm trees that we're trying to clump on the sunny side of Great Plain Avenue, and that would be mimicked both on the east and west side. But that would provide some nice shade buffer for people, much like the gentleman on his cell phone on the picnic table there. Next slide, please. And we talked about the Circle of Peace. The Circle of Peace will be refurbished, cleaned up, and put back very gently. Make sure we'll take care of that. And really, that's what you see in this picture right here. Thank you, Kristen. Next slide, please. All right, so we're getting to a dusk picture here, perspective. As you can see, the lights are starting to come into play. And I really just like, again, and I mentioned the trees, the different tree species. Diversity is huge. I think what we've seen in a lot of designs over the past couple decades are cookie cutter tree designs where an architect, hopefully nobody's an architect here on the call tonight, but architects tend to put monostanza trees, all Bradford pears, all London planes, all whatever it is. But truly you want to have a diverse tree canopy, different sizes, different shapes, different colors, and different visual interests. And really, I think the most proud I am is the team effort to come up with the tree species in this tree design. Not only our team of certified experts, as well as Beta's design team, but Nelson Hammer was a huge help in this. Nelson is a tree lover, and really, I think the two of us afterwards said, you know, wow, what a design that was, what a collaboration, what a vision. So next slide, please. All right, so here, Blue Tree is lit. It's snowy. Nobody wants to see this slide tonight, that's for sure. It might be Friday, actually, but it shows, what this shows is, you know, a winter scene, but what we haven't mentioned in this presentation yet are the Cantonary Lights. That's a word that I had never heard of about a year ago, but now I'm pretty familiar with that. And that's a temporary light system that we could set up annually and take down as well. And you know, Artie Crock and I talked about that, because really one of the cool things we did for New Year's Needham many years ago was the lanterns. And I think a lot of us remember the lanterns and remember that as one of the real most festive times the common scene in many New Years. So I really like that depiction, and that design element is on the table for this design. Next slide, please. So this kind of shows some of the elements that were chosen. The one I really like is the swing bench, and that is the Rose Kennedy Greenway, a picture that is true today. Those swing benches are the same benches that will be in our design. I have been assured that they're middle school proof for half early release days, that they won't break if the kids are out there 10 deep swinging. The other top left shows some of the curvilinear benches that we kind of chose out of a plethora of benches. You know, it's funny, you look at these amenities and how much time is spent talking about what type of bench you like out there. I like this bench because it's permanent in nature. Not permanent, nothing's permanent, but the benches we have now, the Ippia slatted benches, do rot out and do take a lot of maintenance. So these would be a lot less maintenance and a lot longer lasting. In the picnic table, again, we mentioned numerous picnic tables being on the common. And lastly, the Big Belly. Obviously, that's a picture from this past year. We deployed several Big Belly to the common with the uptick of usage. And we'll continue that trend in the future. Next slide, please. Again, more of elements, surface materials, as we spoke about, and you can see in the center picture, that's the streetscape design elements there. So again, we're trying to have that continuity of design and kind of incorporate some of the elements that were successful in past projects into this project as well. The bus shelter, I'm sorry, not much else to say. It's a bus shelter, but we're looking at trying to give it a facelift while we do this work. The uplighting and the building uplights, you know, I think a lot of us were excited to talk about lighting and what lighting can look like in the future and what it looks like now. So I think, again, having the uplit pathways, having the lighting recessed in the pathways so it has that safe feel at night, that aesthetic appeal, and then the ability to have lighting that can be shined upon Town Hall with differing colors to celebrate different events in the future, I think is a cool idea. Next slide, please. So this is my best slide, and I'm kind of wrapping up now, but this is the tree design slide, kind of showing all the varieties and different trees that we chose to pick for this design. And again, you know, the trees along Garrity Way, the Hinoki Fall Cypress, the slender silhouette sweet gums, those 4 trees are really meant to frame Town Hall. I wish I could say that I came up with the idea, but the silhouette sweet gums were Brad Bottomley's idea. I guess at North Attleboro Town Hall or on their common, they've already had these 2 trees that are about 100 years old and they framed in their space. So Brad kind of stole that idea and we used it here. We mentioned the duplicity of the 2 east and west sides with the species trying to mimic that continuity of design. So if you brought a drone over, you could actually see that spatial impact in that similar theme there. And then lastly, as we mentioned a couple times tonight, or as I mentioned, the elm trees. Elm trees used to be everywhere, especially downtown in Needham. They were all over Needham. Elm trees took a big hit in an ice storm in the 30s in town where we lost several thousand. And then Dutch elm disease came in shortly after that, which really decimated the elm tree population across the country. However, in recent years, there have been Dutch elm resistant varieties that have come out, Valley Forge and Princeton, that have been successful and proven. And those are the varieties that we're going to incorporate into this kind of throwback historic feel with the elms out there. I think last slide, Kristen, please. And I think enough about trees, but just kind of showing again in pictures some of the trees that were chosen and how they look as they mature. And I thank you all for your time. Again, I'm so excited and I appreciate your consideration for this construction funding request for the future town common. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Now, do we have questions from committee members? We do from Paul Alpert. Paul?
Yes, I think it would just be good to put on the public record, since this is our public hearing, as to what the timeline will be for when the work will be done, and especially the timeline for when the common will not be accessible to the public because of the work.
And I don't know that we mentioned the actual amount of the request. Have we done that on the record? We have? Okay. All right, I just want to make sure that's on the record too. Thanks, Paul.
Ed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Paul. So I'll try to answer that question the best that I can at this time. There's been much discussion as far as timing of this project. And I'd say at this moment, this project is going to be scheduled to occur not this summer, but next summer. And I think there's many reasons why that's been part of the discussion in the role play moving forward. And it really is revolved around the lifeline that the common has provided the community. You know, we've heard from the merchants, we've heard from the businesses, we've heard from the restaurants that if we were to take this offline early, meaning this summer, potentially that could have a negative impact that we don't want on our local business community. I don't think that changes our timeline. As Karis and I have discussed, we still would like to keep moving forward. And I think this allows us the ability if approved at town meeting and by CPC, to bid this in a little bit better manner, maybe even next winter, to allow us to get better bid pricing to go forward with a contract strong into early spring or maybe I'm sorry, not early spring, but spring and maybe early summer of 2022. Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, Paul, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, how long will the project last? So assuming that you start in, say, June of 2022, how long will the project last? And will the common be inaccessible totally to the public during that period of time? Or will parts still be open?
Thank you, Paul. Two good questions. You know, in the public world, it's tough to give timing because it really depends upon relationships, deliverables, contracts, contractors. But ideally, this is a 5 to 6 month project, start to finish, from what we've heard with the scope and magnitude. The common would be completely inaccessible. Again, what we're talking about here is a complete renovation where almost everything physically will be removed from the common, regrading, subgrading, soils will move, hardscapes will go in. So this is a pretty major impact construction project. So it will not be accessible at all from the day one till the day that it's finished. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Ed.
Okay, and Joe Barnes.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments. Thank you, Ed. It's an exciting project to see again. I think it was mentioned at an earlier presentation that because of the variety of trees and the wonderful job on landscaping that's going to be done, you would consider possibly putting some nameplates in front of those trees, which are so different and varied, that might help people who are enjoying the space during that time. Second comment, the red, I know this is just a design, but the red Adirondack chairs are cheery and bright. You may want to consider also maybe blue Adirondack chairs for town color, the colors of the town. So just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Any other questions? Okay, Ed, I actually have a question. So I just want to, because I think that this is going to come up, and I know the question I think was posed to Harris and she answered it, but let's talk a little bit about the timing. Why are we asking for funding now if you're not going to begin construction for almost another, more than a year, or I guess, yeah. So are you gaining some time, but why is it that and can you explain that to us, for why you are asking for funding now, but yet you're not going to be doing construction for many months?
And do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, if you would, Karis, that'd be great.
So our
Thank you.
typical town meeting funding schedule is that items that are voted in town meeting, there's a period of time in which someone can appeal that the town meeting action. So we, for all intents and purposes, are unable to start taking action on capital funds until mid-June to July of the following year. And most contractors won't begin their work if we don't have a contract signed with them. We can't sign a contract for funds that haven't been committed yet. So that would mean that we would be going out to bid and committing basically as soon as town meeting is completed. And what that does is that sort of limits us as far as how quickly we can start the work. Whereas if we get the funds now, we'll be able to put this out to bid in the winter. Bidding prices tend to be much better in the winter because contractors haven't filled up their schedule for the summer yet. So we tend to be at an advantage in the construction industry as far as pricing goes. And then we're also at an advantage as far as ordering of materials goes, because they'll be able to pre-order materials, and then we could start the work at, I mean, I think we've talked about May or June, as opposed to waiting until July or August.
Okay. All right. I just think that question is going to come up, and so if we could deal with it in a, as part of your presentation, perhaps, but at least be prepared to answer that question. Okay, but I think it's okay. Any other questions? Okay, and let's turn to members of the public. Daphne, anyone from the public?
Yes, we have two hands raised at this time. I'm promoting Stephen Rosenshaw.
Hello again.
Hi, Stephen.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Ed, you look wonderful. I like your haircut. It looks great. Question regarding, and I know you probably don't have the answer, but I'm thinking about the 4th of July parade, and you're talking about this starting in June of 2022. Will the sidewalks be available on Chapel Street, or are they going to be, are you going to have that no one can sort of get anywhere near the road where we start the parade off? Do we have to think about possibly changing the location or the route of the parade and where we start everybody off, where they start off on Great Plain and Chestnut and then feed into Chapel and can you continue from there? Is there any, will there be able to have people on Chapel Street?
Hi, Steve. Thanks.
Hi.
I got a haircut today. I appreciate the kind words. Great points. I would have to say, Steve, that the sidewalks on either side of the common would be construction fenced off with just a slim area to walk by. I think that's something as we get closer, we could probably work out some logistics. I think I learned a couple of years ago, taking the synthetic turfs offline during a summer. If I can get through that project, I can get through any logistical nightmare afterwards. So, but good points. I think we have to consider how we celebrate our major events and how the common has been the focal point for many celebrations, including the 4th of July. And that's a good point. And I honestly hadn't given it much thought, to be honest with you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from Steve or any other members of public?
Yes, we have one more, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go ahead and promote another person. It's Joe Leghorn.
Joe Leghorn.
I think that's actually me. So in spite of my reputation as a liberal, free spending liberal, we spent a lot of money redoing the common over the last few years. As I looked at the presentation, all of that is going to be plowed under. So one of my things is always like, if you're going to invest $1 million in over 10 years, it's $100,000 a year less the discount rate. But as I look at that, all of that around the flagpole and all that is gone. So why did we do that? And why are we now plowing it under?
Okay, so I think actually the underlying premise may not be correct, but we'll let Ed, that's a good question because we have invested a fair amount of money in the common, but let's have Ed explain that a little more fully. Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Joe, nothing will be plowed under. No investments that have been made will be destroyed other than we'll move the blue tree temporarily. It'll be put right back. The wall you mentioned, the flagpole, that's part of the streetscape. So as we mentioned, those elements will stay and then they'll incorporate with the new elements. So nothing will be plowed under. In fact, if anything, the common has been a very affordable area to maintain because Hartney Grandmont actually works with the town pro bono for many years, always kind of does most of the work on the common, but point well taken. We'll protect everything that's out there.
Oh, thank you.
Ed, would it be helpful just to show a picture of the design and show which part of it was from the streetscape renovation? And what part of it is part of our renovation?
And that's a question that's going to come up at town meeting. And probably we may want to clarify that because when you go your first pass through this, you say, hold on a second. I thought we did work there. So let's just clarify that. Okay. If we have you want to put that up now? There it is.
Yeah, so Joe, thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Karis. And point well taken, Peter, as well as Joe. And so you can see that the seat wall and all the improvements made during the streetscape will seamlessly blend in with the new common. So all that will be preserved and protected, and then will be actually graded and blended into the new common. So really, it's the two projects kind of colliding here.
Well, that's fine. I mean, my whole point was presentation. Oftentimes, if you present smoothly, you get through it and you don't get the question. So that was just one that was troubling me. I'm glad you're going for disease-resistant elms. You know, they're lovely trees. I love them. I lived in Evanston, Illinois, that spent millions of dollars a year trying to preserve them in the 70s. And they're a wonderful streetscape. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. All right, any other members of the public with any other questions?
No, Mr. Chair, that's all the hands raised we have on this case.
Okay. All right, so now we will move on to our next request. And I believe that that is the Bay Colony. Excuse me a minute. It's 2205, and that's Fisher Street Trailhead, Needham Rail Trail. The liaisons are Artie Crocker, or the liaison is Artie Crocker.
And do we have either James Goldstein or is Tony Delgado here for who is here to, let's say, give the presentation, which I don't envision.
Tony is here.
Okay, so for the public, this is a creation, I'd say, call it a creation of a parking lot area in picnicking style area at the Fisher Street entrance to the rail trail. And so to present this is Tony Delgado from the town of Needham.
Thank you. Karis, if you could put that plan up showing the area. Perfect. So this project, as Artie was mentioning, this project entails the construction of a small parking area, trees, picnic tables, and guardrail right adjacent to the existing rail trail project. The request is for $15,000 for materials to construct the pink colored asphalt areas and the light blue area, which is composed of Olson chips, and some trees, 5 trees that are adjacent to the entrance drive, and the portion of the rail trail that you can see in this drawing. The idea is to construct kind of a minimalist approach, get the project rolling, and then other interest groups could add on to this project later on, and kind of build it as you go, so to speak. But to get the project underway, some basic construction has to be done. The design was performed in-house. The project actually has been laid out. If you go out to the field, you'll see construction stakes delineating the area to be constructed. Preparation work will get underway very shortly. I'd say within a month. And then, as Karis was mentioning previously, the funding would not become available until after July 1st, where we can purchase materials, and then the asphalt areas can be constructed. The Olson chips can be purchased and installed. The trees and the picnic tables would be installed, courtesy of the Park and Forestry Division. And we anticipate that the $15,000 that we are requesting will be sufficient for that purpose. And that's really it. I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Tony. First, we'll turn to the committee. Does the committee have any questions? Okay. Now, members of the public. Daphne, do we have any members of the public who have questions?
No hands raised on this case.
Okay. And I just want to point out with this project, it was designed by the town, being built by the town. The only request has been for the materials, and the rest of it is being taken care of by our town and the DPW department. So good. Thank you, Tony. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is 2206 resurface synthetic track at Phaseo Field. And I guess it's Ed who's going to be presenting. Sorry, but I should mention that the liaisons, Paul Alpert and Laura Dorfman, one of them will introduce the project.
Laura, you and I didn't discuss this. Do you want me to go ahead, or do you want to introduce?
You go right ahead, Paul.
Okay. Be happy
Thank you.
to. Okay, so this is a request for $166,000 to resurface the synthetic track at the Phaseo Field. The track has considerable wear and tear, which Ed will get into the specifics. And so it needs to be fixed. And this was a project that was presented to us last year. For various reasons, we decided not to fund it last year. And so the Park and Recreation Committee is back to us this year with the same request. I don't believe it's costing us more money. Hopefully it's not, or if it is, it's not significant. For not having funded it last year, but it's basically the same project that was presented last year. And so I turn it over to Ed to be more specific.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you all again. I'm Edward Olson, Superintendent of Parks and Forestry. It's my pleasure to present tonight's request for construction funding.
If I may just quickly interrupt, what happened to the great Kelly Green sweater? We don't deserve the Kelly Green sweater for this project, Ed?
I was starting to sweat a little bit because it's the second year for this project, so I took the sweater off. I'm joking. So thank you again. My pleasure tonight to present the Phaseo track construction funding request in the amount of $166,000. As Paul mentioned, this was a project that was brought before the CPC last year, and for various reasons was asked to be represented this year. Not as glamorous a project as the last one I just spoke to on the town common design, but I think an equally important project. As mentioned, this is going to be my 11th year for the town of Needham, and I came in right after the historic Field of Dreams project. The Field of Dreams project was a privately funded, raised project that basically essentially gave the town, gifted to the town, the new Memorial Park, synthetic fields, as well as the 90-foot diamond at Memorial Park. In addition to that, the renovated field complex at the Phaseo, including the synthetic, the 2 baseball fields, the 90-foot baseball field, not Ace of Small, and Conroy Field, which Tony managed. Thank you, Tony, and the engineering department for the town of Needham. So the track was built over 11 years ago. So long story short, it's getting pretty old. This style track has a useful life of about 25 years. We're well past the warranty. So this isn't warranty issues that we're talking about. This is just wear and tear. I know Karis is a big walker. I'm a big walker, but people use the track every single day. It's as I mentioned in my comment presentation, it's a hotbed of activity on a daily basis from morning, noon till night, as Chris knows, because Chris is usually out there helping me patrol the grounds and seeing what's going on out there. Thank you, Chris. And And as was mentioned, it was showing signs of delamination a couple years ago. We put the project on hold for a year. Obviously, things didn't get better over the last year. They got slightly worse. So what Stacy Mulroy and I did a couple months ago is we revisited this with Cape and Island Tennis, the firm that installed this track for the town of Needham over a dozen years ago. And they mentioned again, you got to move pretty quick. If you push this off, you're going to really delaminate. You're going to have cold cracks and you'll de-ravel. And what we're talking about now is basically taking the surface and spraying on a new surface, cleaning it up and spraying it on. So essentially you have a new top coat. I gave the analogy last year of a driveway sealant. That's really what we have out there. We have a road base that has a rubber coat on top. The rubber is worn off. Now it's time to clean it and reapply that rubber coating in multiple different layers, letting it dry and cure to essentially rebuild that top layer of the rubberized track. If anybody's walked out there, you can see, and we'll look at a picture in a second, you can see that it's orange. It's an orange track, but as it wears out, you can see the undercoat, which is black. So it's pretty quite clear to see how it's wearing, where it's wearing. And when I speak about where, it's typically in the starting blocks in certain high use areas. But in addition to that, it's showing general use wear across the board. And that was noted in the most recent visit from Cape and Island this past fall. So with that being said, with the help of Kristen, once again, I'm going to bring up a short presentation that I shared with you all last year. Again, nothing glamorous here, but I'll start right from the start. So we mentioned where, the Phaseo. So the Phaseo, as we talked about, we have two 90-foot diamonds. We have two soccer fields. We have a Little League 60-foot diamond. And then we have the synthetic complex. And then we have Conroy Field in the middle. And surrounded by Conroy Field is our one track in the town of Needham. Again, approximately 12 years old. Useful life, 25 years. So again, we're at the midlife point of this track. This is common typical practice where you clean it, reapply this, the structural surface application method, and that basically essentially gives you a second life to this. If we push this off, what happens is the cold cracks and the delamination will exacerbate. And much like a road base, you'll start seeing the unraveling of the bottom, not just the top, but the whole profile. So right now, we're in pretty good shape, showing signs of age, and that's why we're here tonight to talk about track resurfacing. And really, this is the time to plan for our future needs. As mentioned, especially in this past year when we reconsidered how we redesigned the town common, how we utilize that space, how we've seen the space utilized just by the pandemic, the track. I mean, early on in this pandemic, really what we were hearing was get outdoors, get clean air, walk, passive recreation. We saw an influx of people come to the Phaseo and utilize this town asset. Next slide, please. So really, how did we get here? As mentioned, we've had Cape and Island, the company that installed this track per the Field of Dreams a dozen years ago, come to Needham the past 2 years in a row and give us an evaluation and some professional recommendations, hence the reason for our request for construction funding tonight. Next slide, please. How we based upon our cost estimates was really on that report. We have a detailed report from Cape and Island who does this. Really, they're the leader on the East Coast as far as track installs. If you do a little research, they're kind of the top firm out there. They are busy. They're pros. They know tracks better than anybody. It really, we brought the experts out. We listened, and then they provided us the report that we drew the cost estimate and construction funding request from. Next slide, please. And I didn't, well, maybe I don't have too many more slides. This was a pretty small presentation, really. Thank you, Chris. I guess not. As I mentioned last year, really all you have to do is walk the track and you can see what we're talking about. So thank you for your time and your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Do we have any members of the committee, any committee members who have questions? No. I just have one comment, Ed, which is if we can have a picture of the areas that are well worn for the presentation at town meeting, because I think the picture tells it all. We've got some pretty good pictures that show the delamination, especially around the starter blocks and other areas. Okay. Would help. Now we'll move on to members of the public. Daphne, do we have any members of the public who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
There are no hands raised on this case.
Okay. So with that, we'll close out our discussion on the Phaseo synthetic track resurface, and we'll move on to 2207 Mcleod Field renovation. The liaison here is Artie Crocker. Artie?
Thank you, Peter. So as Peter mentioned, this is the Mcleod Field, which I guess I'd say resides in the Phaseo complex area. And just to give just a brief little update, I'm sure Ed will talk a little bit more about this. This project our understanding has evolved with this project. And as this project, at first we thought it was, let's say, a drainage project where they pipe under the field, and that is a part of the problem or create a problem. But in essence, this project is evolving into what it really was in the first place. And that is, it is a redesign of the field which does need drainage fixing, not related to the pipe under the field itself, but also some amenities added to the field. And we're looking at other projects in town and what they would normally cost for the designing of that project, and this fits within that scope. So with that, again, this is Mcleod Field and the Phaseo Field Complex. And with that, I'll let Ed Olson take it over. And there you go. You're up, Ed.
Thank you, Artie. Thank you, everybody. Again, Ed Olson, Superintendent of Parks and Forestry. Thank you for having me here to consider the design funding request for Mcleod Field redesign. I've mentioned a couple times my 11-year career here, but here's the story of my first day. I remember vividly meeting Robert Lewis, and he took me around in a rapid tour of all the buildings in town for about 4 hours. He told me the history of every building. And at the end of that 4-hour whirlwind tour of town, he threw me a ton of keys and said, "Hey, go get them, kid. And by the way, we have a huge sinkhole at this field called Mcleod. You got to fix it in the next 2 weeks for baseball season." And that was my introduction to the town of Needham, was that day. And I remember going out to Mcleod Field and seeing this massive sinkhole, wondering what was going on. So, fast forward 11 years, this project has evolved, as already mentioned, and maybe I didn't do such a great job in my description originally for this application. And I think even in my presentations early on this project, I think I might have focused a little bit too much on the dramatic flair of the drainage. But as already mentioned, this is a design funding request, and the drainage is a small part of an overall reconstruction field design, much like we've done at similar fields across town. However, there's history to this field. And with that said, I think Kristen's going to help bring up a new revised PowerPoint that I'd like to share with you all. So again, we're talking about a design and engineering funding request for Mcleod Field in the amount of $45,000. So as already mentioned, we've talked a lot about the Phaseo tonight, but it's at the Phaseo Field Complex. Mcleod is the 90-foot baseball field, and I'll show you in a next slide where it's located. So it's really in the top right corner. Thank you, Kristen. So that's Mcleod. It's right on the edge of the synthetic field. And it's part of the larger complex. And when we talk about the Phaseo, once again, this was a field complex that was gifted to the town by incredible donors and incredible effort before I got to town. And then over the years, we've done a lot of work out here. We have renovated Warner as well as Healy Fields. If Kristen could show the asterisk over by Dedham Ave. That whole side we renovated shortly into my tenure here. We regraded and resodded those fields, and really what you see in this picture is what we have now. We fixed some grading issues and some drainage issues there. ASA small beneath those two fields is the 60-foot diamond that we've discussed, and we're actually working with Little League as a town project, a collaborative town project on a future renovation of that field. We saw the synthetic track presentation, but really in the center of this beautiful complex is our one and only track. As we talked about a couple of years ago, the synthetic turf, first generation field turf, was renovated in the summer of 2019. Both Memorial and Phaseo synthetic turf were renovated successfully, and very pleased with the results of those projects. So really, when we speak about Mcleod, it's part of a larger kind of theme here. We're trying to fix and work on all these fields. So it's a design funding request to look at Mcleod specifically. Next slide, please. Why? So field-related improvements are needed and desired. So really, this is a solutions design. We've heard a lot about Mcleod. Mcleod is grown since that last picture, as you'll see in this next slide, please. So designing solutions for Mcleod in particular complex. So long has been discussed since day one that I got here, going back to working with Mike, or our former athletic director, and Patty Carey, our former director of Park and Rec, where the issue of connectivity through Mcleod Field to the synthetic complex. And if we go back to that last picture, you can kind of see, yep, there you go, exactly what Kristen's asterisk is showing. When we have high school events, when we're running 2 games at the Phaseo, they're running side by side, and the spectators typically tend to walk through Mcleod all the way along the field, all the way back to where our bleachers are on the hill by the golf course. So that connectivity of bringing patrons and spectators to the seating spots through an active field has always been an issue. So one of the desires has always been having a formalized pathway with protective netting to safely bring patrons to the other side through this very active site. Next slide, please. So player athlete safety issues. So again, we're talking about bringing athletes, spectators through an active baseball field, and what that looks like is sometimes a little chaotic. As Chris will mention, being a baseball guy, there's been times where people will walk right through the outfield during an active game, and that's certainly something that can lead to problems. So what do you do? We've long since talked about formalizing the JV baseball field. Again, Mcleod is is not only used by our Little League softball program, but it's also our JV baseball field. So we've long since talked to the athletic director and the coach about having an outfield fence that will actually enclose the park, much like many formal baseball stadiums have. Next was adjust grading and field transitions. So I mentioned the project with Warner and Healy. A lot of issues that we ran into were field grading issues from the original design, where we graded and had elevation grades that actually sheeted the water onto the playing surface. And that's this is a big issue at Mcleod. As the grades go down and bring the stormwater, we're actually sheeting the water onto the ball diamond playing surface. That's a no-no in athletics, in sports turf. And unfortunately, that was something that Gail designed that we will correct and try to spine the outfield and sheet the water to the left and right side of the field. You never want to introduce water to a clay surface unless you have a hose. Finished lacrosse wall construction gift to the town is a big driver of this design, is how we formalize that gift that was graciously offered to the town, but not quite finished by the lacrosse folks, and how we kind of finish that project and tie that into the complex. As you'll see in the slide to come, as differentiated by the earlier slides, you'll actually see the lacrosse wall out there as it exists today. Additional fencing improvements. If anyone's ever been to a baseball game at Mcleod, even though JV plays there, it is not their preferred location. Why? Look at right field, look at first base. If you hit a foul ball, where does it go? It goes into the wetlands. So a lot of lost baseballs, a lot of expensive baseballs gone. You pop one up over the backstop, and what do? You smash a window in the car that's right outside the fencing. So long since has been discussion about adding some safety fencing layers so the cars are protected and fans are protected, as well as baseballs contained within the active park and not lost to the wood line adjacent. Spectator seating, another thing you'll notice, really there are no spectator seatings for this ball diamond. So we've heard for many years, Where do you want us to sit? Again, people tend to sit in the parking lot on this field when there's a JV game. As Chris knows, parents will be right in the parking lot. And it's funny when you see it because nobody wants to park too close to third baseline because that's where the broken windows are. So there's always a gap there where people will just kind of throw down their chairs that they know nobody's brave enough to park their Lexus over there because of all the smashed windshields in the past. And lastly, I just wanted to mention when we're designing solutions, these are just things that we've talked about for many years that have been on the table. But as we saw with the Common project, once you get into design and get the right people at the table, additional possibilities are yet to be determined or discussed. Things come out of these designs that you never would have even thought about. So really, again, I'm stressing the fact that there's many things that will be brought to the table here. Next slide, please. So mentioning, one of the big things, connectivity to the synthetic fields, as you can see by that real worn out shot in the bottom left, that's where the masses come to enter the turf. And then from there, it's kind of willy-nilly as to how fans get out there and where they go from there. And I want to mention, this isn't just a baseball field. This field is used for the Memorial Day soccer tournament as an active soccer field. As I mentioned before, the lacrosse wall was put up about a year and a half ago. Since then, it's really been active with lacrosse players that have been practicing all times of year. So this has multiple use, not just baseball. Next slide, please. All right, so this picture again shows the turf in the background, the outfield of the baseball field, and then it transitions into the actual, what I call the skin surface. That's the infield material, the clay. As we talked about, the water right now sheets from the synthetic across the outfield and then dumps onto the infield. That's a no-no in the design world. And by a simple strip and remove and regrade, much like we've done in a couple field projects before, that can be easily fixed. So I mentioned maybe a little bit too long last time, the 48-inch drainage pipe that runs through the field. And right where Kristen's asterisk is right now is a huge patch of new grass because we have fixed this drainage line several times. You can kind of see the scars within those beautiful lines there. Next slide, please. And I think what, mentioning from the slide previous, this is a drain, not a field drain. This is a stormwater drainage pipe for the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the field complex on the other side of the railroad tracks. So this is, I think, my second day on the job right here. I'm not in the picture, but, after my boss threw me the keys and told me I had 2 weeks to fix a massive sinkhole, we started getting the, some heavy equipment out there, excavators, dump trucks, and really made quite a big mess out there. However, we did our best to Band-Aid the pipe and fixed it in that spot. And unfortunately, the failure just continues down that line. Next slide, please. And I might have mentioned too long, but every time we're out there, there's an aftermath. These are large areas that we're fixing. Big pipe, again, this is a 4-foot drainage pipe. I used to be a golf course superintendent. I used to think 4-inch pipes were big, but 48-inch pipes are, they're real big. So this is a big mess when you're out there. And honestly, the JV coach doesn't like to see that, as you can imagine. So next slide, please. As a result of a mess like that, you get field-related issues from the repairs. We don't use pesticides in the town of Needham. Many years ago, we had a citizen petition from some concerned town meeting members because some herbicides have been used at the library. Ever since that day, the town is committed to using a non-pesticide approach to all its land management. But when you don't use pesticides, you know what you get? You get weeds. And you'll see if you walk that field, despite the pretty lines, it is a pretty heavily weeded complex. Next slide, please. So I like this picture a lot right here because one, I think it's just a pretty photo. I believe this is us, I thought, setting up for Rick Merson's parade, if I'm not mistaken. We had the bucket truck. But I like it because of the striping. I'm a big fan of that, as we all know. And And it shows multiple different things that we'd like to talk about with this design. And really that back left photo, the wear, you can see as people come into the stadium and go to the synthetic, they're coming through this baseball field and really doing some serious damage. So consideration has been given to repaving some of that, widening the pavement that you see that's there right now. That's really minimalistic, and trying to come up with some creative solutions to minimize that type of scorched earth feel out there. The other reason I like this picture is, again, you can see in center field the big gaps where we've dug this field up several times and had to repair this line in years past. It kind of shows you got dark green back and left, and then you have some of those big sod squares and grass squares that we had to grow in under fire out there. I like this picture because you can see how people come into the park, and again, they're traversing through that foul line territory into the synthetic, as well as into the lacrosse wall that we talked about, which was a gracious gift given to us by the program, but it's not quite finished to the standard of the town. That would be something that we'd want to transition into grades and potentially use some of the scrap artificial turf remnants from the first generation turf to formalize a better surface, a safer surface for the kids' throwing wall. Next slide, please. So again, thank you for your time. This is a design funding request. The design process will involve, next slide, thank you, Kristen. It will involve, as we always involve, next slide, please, the Park and Rec department, the user groups, athletics, the community groups, and really try to tie in all the things that I previously mentioned with this design, as well as the possibilities of whatever comes up through those meetings. As we found in years past, you never know, but we try to keep an open mind. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for the presentation. Members of the committee, do you have questions? The presentation is a little different than you initially presented to us, so there may be some questions. Laura Dorfman.
Hi, thank you so much, Ed, for that. My question was, should the original request be modified, or should there be an addendum to it? Because it, as you alluded to earlier in your presentation, it's much different from what you presented tonight, and I think it's important for people to understand the whole scope, not just the original document.
You know, I think I got my point well taken. Thank you, Laura. I think I got myself in a little pickle on this one again. I think I was juggling too many balls at the time and wasn't as cognizant of my wording for this. So I think I am open to that, but I would defer to my director, Karis Lustig.
So we had talked about this, I think, at our last meeting, if I'm not mistaken, Peter. And I think we decided that it did not need to be changed, but that we were going to review the language as it appears in the town meeting warrant to make sure that it reflects the project as, as it is actually being conceived, because that's what the town meeting will actually be voting on to approve. And that's what will then stand for what the project has to accomplish.
Okay. A question, Bob Dermott.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ed. Good presentation. Can we revisit the cost of the amount of the request with respect to how much the pipe, how much will be spent on the pipe versus how much will be spent on non-pipe things? I think that's a question that we've discussed before, I know, but I'd just like to revisit it for clarity.
So I think what came up, Ed, when you weren't here at our last meeting, your request is for $45,000. I think we walked out of that. We arrived at an understanding that design costs related to the pipe were $3,000, but then we saw a bid for $49,000. So we're just so we wanted some clarity, which is does the 45 include the 3 for the design of the pipe? Or and perhaps you can explain that to us. Did I capture that correctly, Bob Germany?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ed.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Peter. So the design funding request before CPC stands at $45,000. As you mentioned, Peter, there was a slight mathematical error between the 3,000 and the 4,000 as you look at the original proposal from Ty and Bond. But let's remember, these aren't true proposals. These are design firms that are sitting down with us, helping us get numbers to present product. These aren't formal bids. They aren't bids at all. And they don't exist. These aren't legal contracts. These are just helpful scopes that give us cost estimates for us to work with. I've spoken to the vice president of Ty and Bond. He assured me again that the drainage works 3,000. That would be additional, as Karis had mentioned, I think in the select board, or I'm sorry, in maybe last week's meeting, that would be taken from the general fund. And that's a small amount. As Bradley Mosquito, the vice president, mentioned, we'll provide video cameraing of the lines, and then they'll come up with creative, cost-effective solutions. So it's really, and again, that's my fault. And I did listen to the discussion last week, and I think Artie did a great job. Thank you, Artie. I think I did a lousy job, and I'll take full responsibility for that. I think I could have been better. Yeah, look at Chris looking dumbfounded, but that is on me, and my apologies. But 45 is the desired requested amount before CPC. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Now, wait a minute. Now I need clarity on that. 45, which you're saying, I don't mean to pick at this, but 45, but it's not, but that doesn't include the pipe.
Correct.
Got it. That's all. All right. Okay, any questions, further questions from the committee? All right, let's go to the general public.
Peter?
Oh, yes.
I think I raised my hand.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Rick.
That's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. It's Rick Zimbone. Ed, thank you. Great presentation. I just have a couple sequencing questions, if you would. You're going to be going through the design phase with this money, and for both the field improvements as well as the design associated with the resolution of the drainage pipe underneath the field. Is that correct?
That is correct, Rick.
Okay, so then once that's completed and you have a fix for the drainage issue, will you be doing that simultaneously as you're doing some of these field modifications, or will, depending upon the scope, will you have to perhaps do the drainage issue first and then come back and do all the other aspects of the design that you're talking about here?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. That's an interesting and good question right there, really drilling down. The short answer is no, or yes, we could do the field drainage repairs separately. I think what I've heard, there are various techniques that won't affect the playing surface that they could do internally. There's a method called spin casting, so they're not hypothetically conjoined. However, typically when we dig up a project or a field, it's always best to do it all once for cost purposes and economies of scale. But I don't think they are independent of each other, or could be for that matter.
Okay, and if you had to go forward and relocate that drain pipe, that would be a much more of a major project. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Again, this is a big pipe. It's a long pipe, and again, it has to daylight somewhere. So if we were to redirect that so it doesn't go through Mcleod Field, it would have to go through somewhere else. That would be a larger project.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other further questions by any members of the committee? All right, let's go to the public. Daphne, do we have anyone with their hands raised? Questions for Mcleod Field?
There are no hands raised for this proposal.
Okay. Karis?
I would just indicate that Joe Leghorn has asked for the physical location of Mcleod Field and suggested that that might be important information for town meeting members to know which field it is that we're referring to.
Okay, so we have that. I think one of your aerials, centers it pretty well, and we could maybe add a couple of sentences when you show that aerial. So actually, it comes in the back end of the presentation, right? The aerial that really shows you where the field is. It's almost one of the last. So just consider that in terms of the presentation, because I think in fairness, that's right. If people are scratching their noggin trying to figure out where it is, they're going to be distracted during the balance of the presentation. Okay. You think that addresses that, Karis? Okay. And Bob Dermody.
Yeah, sorry if I may, real quick again, friendly suggestion, Ed, just put label on the photograph. This is Mcleod Field, because people at town meeting might not hear your verbal description. Real quick, the 48-inch pipe that goes under the baseball field, does it also go under the turf soccer fields?
No, it doesn't. It actually runs, if we can go back to the presentation, Kristen, with one of the good photos that might depict the edge of the turf, I can walk you through its location. But essentially it runs parallel to the side of the, basically, yeah, right there. That's a great picture, Kristen. Thank you very much. So it's really that green space between, in that photo, it's the green space between the synthetic field and the rubberized track. So it's really where you see the footing of the synthetic, it's really running up lengthwise with that footing.
Okay.
So it goes underneath the train tracks through the length of the field, and then it takes kind of a left-hand turn right through the center field of Mcleod Field, and then daylights both center way between first base and the foul pole on right field at Mcleod.
Great.
And
Thanks,
you
Ed.
can, if you walk out there this time of year, you can actually walk and really see where it kind of comes out into the woods. It's a big pipe. Thank you, Robert.
Okay. Any questions? No questions from the committee, and I assume no one else has their hand raised at this point for the public. Daphne?
That is correct.
Okay, so we'll close our discussion with Mcleod Field. Ed, thank you very much. And I think that's it for you for the evening.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Next up is 2208. This is a request for design funds in the amount of $6,000 for a trail identification design in order to create a uniform system of our signage, kiosks, and trail maps in our various outdoor spaces. It's a request from the Conservation Committee, and Deb Anderson will make the presentation. This was another request that was on for 21, but we deferred it for a number of reasons, most of which had to do with skinnying down, if you will, our CPC presentations in light of the fact that we were in the midst of COVID. Okay, Deb.
Hi, good evening. I'm Debbie Anderson, the Director of Conservation. Thank you for this opportunity to present this request on behalf of the Conservation Commission tonight. The request before you is to seek funds for professional design services related to trail identification. I believe that this request is especially timely with individuals and families being affected by COVID and taking to socially distancing on the various town properties and our extensive trail network. If you can allow me to share my screen. Okay. If you were a first-time visitor to the town's properties and trails, instead of finding cohesive, easy-to-follow signage at the trailheads along the trails themselves via trailblazers and trail directional signs, you would find each parcel with trails, many having a separate, independently designed sign indicating its name. Trail markers and directional signage may be different on each trail if present at all. Some examples of the existing signage I'm going to show you. So these are photos. These were all recently taken. These are some photos of Ridge Hill Reservation. You can see existing signage is generally showing its age, not only physically, but in the information that it relays. These are some additional signage that we have along the Fit Trail and other areas at Ridge Hill Reservation. As you can see, they're not very informative and definitely out of date. These are some photos at the town forest. You can see the middle picture some people have taken to creating their own versions of signage. And these are just some miscellaneous photos. This is kind of your welcome to the Sweet Wildlife Preserve, and just the trail markers are confusing. There's different colors and different symbols. So just generally not very intuitive. Hold on one sec, sorry. So we are requesting $6,000 in funding to hire a pre-approved design engineering firm to help the commission with the following goals. This request addresses a long-standing goal of the Conservation Commission and is identified as a priority in the town of Needham's Master Trails Plan. The commission wishes to create a standardized look and feel for signage located at the various parcels, including trailheads, trail markers, and kiosks. Having cohesive, easy to follow signage and markers, as well as additional thoughtfully placed kiosks, will encourage the public to enjoy our trails and all the properties have to offer. The deliverables that we're looking to receive from the consultant will first visit the properties to ascertain existing conditions. They will then develop options for graphic presentation of new and updated standardized trail mapping. The consultant will develop a system of identification signage for trailheads and options for informational kiosks and directional signs, including trail markers. Following selection of the preferred options, the consultant will create design standards for each element. And we're also looking into an exciting new live mapping feature, allowing the public to follow trails on their phones will be explored. These are some examples of trail maps that are potential to be branded for use in Needham. And that is some more examples. And that is the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Debbie, thank you for the presentation. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Debbie? No? Okay. How about Daphne? Any members of the public? Do they have questions?
There are no hands raised on this proposal.
Okay. Well, then we are going to close it out. Debbie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation, and that will end our discussion on 2208 trail identification. All right, we're going to move on to I think 2209 is Walker Pond improvements, and I think what we're going to do is table that. I'm going to turn to our staff director.
Yep.
Karis.
So I did confirm with Dave Davison, the assistant town manager, that this particular article is going to be moved out of the community preservation section of the town meeting warrant and moved to the special warrant article section. So it will no longer be seeking funding from the CPA.
Okay, so there'll be a warrant article in our, and I guess our special town meeting, which will be embedded within the meeting itself, right? Okay, so there may be some folks listening who are interested people listening from the Walker Pond area. And so that is the update that we have for them. The request for funding will be pursuant to a warrant article at town meeting, correct? Yes, okay. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to 2210, town reservoir sediment removal. And that is our town engineer again, Tony Delgazo. Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know what? I'm sorry, I messed up. I'm getting tired. We have the liaison and then the liaison introduces you. So I apologize. So this is town reservoir sediment removal. The liaisons are Paul Alpert and Penny Kirk. And one of the liaisons will introduce you, Tony. So I apologize. Let's start. We'll try that again. Paul or Penny?
Penny, shall I start here or okay, thank you. Thank you, and Tony, welcome again. This is a project seeking $262,000 for design funding for the best way to remove polluted sediment from the town reservoir. This is a little bit of a misnomer, but I believe the committee understands what the funds are for and why it is so high, because it is not only to, let me back up. Water is flowing into the reservoir from various sources. Various pollutants are carried into the reservoir. The pollutants settle to the bottom of the reservoir, but also mix with the water, drain out from the reservoir into Alder Brook. Alder Brook has become extremely polluted and is designated as a category 5 impaired water body by the federal government, which means it needs cleaning. And the way to clean it is to get the pollutants out of the reservoir. And so we need funds are needed to dredge areas of the reservoir where there are pollutants. And so the funding, the $262,000, is to determine the best way to do that, including determining the scope of how much of the reservoir actually has to be dredged and from where, what parts of the reservoir, which has not yet been determined, but the $262,000 part of that will be used to determine that, and then to design how the work will be done. And I will let Tony now fill in the nuts and bolts.
Okay.
And if I got it wrong, Tony, correct me.
Actually, Paul, I don't need to really say anything because
Paul, thank you for that short presentation. Thank you for that short introduction. Okay.
I don't know if Karis, if you have the photograph of the reservoir available, but essentially everything that Paul mentioned is correct. The way to clean up Alder Brook is to clean up the source water. So we prefer to use the word impairments than pollutants because it's a little more, I guess, general in nature in terms of what the things that we have to do. But we do have to remove some sediment. And in this picture, you can see that on the northern side of the reservoir, that white area is where the sediment has washed into the reservoir from Phaseo and the wetland area just north of the reservoir. That sediment has to be removed. The sediment has been accumulating there for years, decades even. So that definitely has to be removed. And after going through the Rosemary Lake project and dredging that lake, we decided that it would be beneficial to take a look at every way that you could clean up this reservoir, not just dredging. Some dredging does have to occur, as I mentioned, but what other ways can we do that? How can we clean up the water, how can we improve that water quality within the reservoir so that Alderbrook itself will flush out, so to speak. We are required to do this. We don't really have a choice. It is in our permit, stormwater permit, which was filed and accepted, approved by the EPA. And so we're in the position of having to, having to do this. I would like to mention that of the 5 Category 5 water bodies that are in the town of Needham that the EPA has identified and instructed us to clean up, the first one was Rosemary Brook. The second one is the reservoir flowing into Alderbrook. The third one is expected to be Fuller Brook, which is off of Great Plain Avenue near the Wellesley, town of Wellesley. And 2 sections of the Charles River, which the EPA has, not the EPA, the Charles River Watershed Association has identified as getting a grade of A, basically meaning that those 2 sections of the Charles River, as of right now, have been cleaned up. That's definitely due to all of the stormwater improvements that we have been making all over town. But I'm very happy about that because that's two water bodies that we will not have to, spend money on to basically to clean up. So as Paul was mentioning, this is for design funds. It's what our idea is to try to figure out the best way to do this. That concludes the presentation. Paul pretty much said everything else. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Peter had to reboot his computer and he's not back yet.
There is one, excuse me, Paul, it's Laura Dorfman, Daphne, there is one question. You see that? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I will, Peter is back. Peter, I turn the call back over to you.
All right, so can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is from my phone. I've had computer problems, so I don't know what's going on. So, okay, so has Tony completed his presentation?
Tony has just completed his presentation. I was just about to ask the committee if they had
Okay, Tony, it was a wonderful presentation. So does the committee have any questions? Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, all right.
Penny is raising her hand.
Okay, good. Sorry, so I can't, somehow or another. Okay, thanks, Karis, for helping me here.
It's
Penny?
just a suggestion. I think it would be a good idea to use the little marker just to delineate where Alderbrook is on that aerial picture.
Oh,
Okay.
sure. Thank you.
Okay. And any other questions by the committee? No? All right. All right, so now, Daphne, do we have questions from the listening public?
Yes, we do. I'm going to promote Mr. Leghorn.
Right, I seem to be the bane of your existence tonight, but my only question is, are there any deadlines set by EPA for the cleanup of the reservoir?
Okay, Tony's pretty familiar with that. Let's have Tony answer that question.
Certainly. There are no calendar dates that the EPA set forth. What they require is that we diligently and consistently pursue the cleanup of the 5 Category 5 water bodies. The permit that we took out is a 5-year permit. You could argue that they want them cleaned up in 5 years, but quite frankly, I don't think that's a reasonable thing to say. I can say though, if after the reservoir we only have Fuller Brook left, then they probably will end up being cleaned up, I'd say in 5 to 6 years.
No, thank you. I was just like wondering what the the stated deadlines are right now. Thank you.
No, they didn't. Yeah, they didn't put any dates.
Okay. Any other questions from the public?
There are no more hands raised on this item.
Okay, thank you, Daphne. Okay, so with that, we're going to be closing out discussions regarding the actual applications that have been submitted for review. And we have what we would be an item that's would be handled under our financial warrant. And that is a CPC generated proposal to increase the amount of funding to our community housing restricted funds bucket from 11% of our projected receipts to 22%. And so with that, we have a working group of various members of the committee that have worked on that, including Bob Germany, Laura Dorfman, Joe Barnes, and Rick Simbo. Rick has really been spearheaded the effort, if you will, and Rick will make a presentation to our committee and to the public tonight. So Rick, why don't you take over?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Karis, if you wouldn't mind putting up the PowerPoint, and we'll see if we can run through this for everyone's benefit. Okay. As the chairman indicated, this is the warrant article that we use when all the projects are presented and approved by town meeting. We put together a warrant article to appropriate the budgets and the funds for the community preservation group of projects. So if you go to the next slide. Thank you. This is typically the way the fund reads. It's basically to appropriate a sum pursuant to the law, basically estimating the preservation fund revenues, set aside certain amounts for future appropriation. And it's always broken down into an administrative component and then components for 4 categories: the general fund, community housing reserve, the historic reserve, and the open space, which tends to include recreation projects. And I've listed it here as TBT, to be determined, primarily because we haven't made any decisions on the projects. We haven't finalized any votes. There's no funding yet, but once all that takes place, this will be updated in the warrant article, and there'll be actual numbers placed in this particular warrant article for approval by town meeting. Next slide, please. So basically, to talk about our funding approval process, historically, and this has been since the CPC has been in existence, the committee collects applications presented by various applicants, and we process them annually, pretty much as received. The projects that are first reviewed once they come in for CPA funding eligibility, and then they're either determined not to be eligible or if they are determined to be eligible, then they'll be partially or fully funded to the amount requested based on any number of criteria. That's the way we've handled it historically. It's also the way the majority of cities and towns who participate in the CPA process handle their requests. There are a number of towns, and we are looking to become one of them this year, is to change that process just slightly and look ahead and do a little bit of planning for the future. And what we mean by that is to take a look at the projects that are anticipated 3 to 5 years out, identify or try to identify those priorities, and then where necessary and where specific projects haven't been identified, to earmark funds for future use. And it's a practice that's done by many towns. And this will be the first time we'll be introducing this type of concept at town meeting. We've put together a little bit of a presentation here to talk a little bit about this. But let me, if you go to the next slide, let me talk a little bit about how we got to where we are and why this came about. First of all, the committee took a look and where by year and category our CPA funding for projects, the CPA eligible funding has been approved. And as you can see, the majority, quite honestly, and it's just been the way it's been handled so far, has gone towards open space. Recreation projects tend to fall under open space, but they will be funded out of the general funds, but they're categorized under open space for the purposes of the presentation. You've got a housing bucket, and then you've got historical preservation. Now, the open space, recreation, and the housing bucket are utilize money in the general fund, particularly when you do bonding for projects. And the money that's represented there reflects future expenditures going out in time as a result of the 2 projects that have been bonded so far, the town hall, which is a historic renovation project, and the recreation project for Rosemary Pool and the redoing of Rosemary Pool. And the bottom line really is if you take a look at where the numbers have been spent so far, you can see that approximately 59% has been spent or earmarked for open space and recreation, 37% for historical renovation, which predominantly is the town hall, and 4% is for housing. Now, that's 4% of what's been approved and expended. And so what we did is we took a look at this, and we also kind of looked at where we are with respect to the financial plan that's been, and the financial models that are out there with projects that have already been identified moving forward in the town. And what prompted us to do this a little bit was referred to by the chairman earlier on when we took a look at the school administration building and the $12 million plus requests that we had received. And if you factor that into the models, what we find is that the majority of our flexibility moving forward is diminished once we finance that money or that level of money, which caused us to take a look at why we perhaps wanted to consider another number for appropriation for the school administration building, and that was referred to earlier in the presentation. But what's also clear here is there's a 4% expenditure level in housing. And we know there's projects out there. We've talked about them, but they're not reflected in the in any of the capital planning except with a footnote. And we thought that was important that we take a look at this and address this going forward. So if you go to the next slide, please. And again, historically, and we've talked about this, you'll hear it talked about every year. Historically, we've allocated 11%. It's a 10% minimum. We as a town have allocated 11% into the 3 housing buckets: community housing, historical resources, open space, and then there's a 5%, up to 5%, but we fixed it at 82,000 per year for the last few years for administrative costs. And then the balance of the money flows into the general fund reserve as far as budgeting is concerned. This year, as Peter mentioned, we'll be looking to increase the community housing reserve, in essence, double it to 22%. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we go forward and how a little bit more details how we came about to this. Next slide, please. Right now, the status of the reserve accounts, and that's as of the end of last year. The community housing reserve has just under 2.5 million in its bucket right now. The open space recreation reserve, I'm going to skip the historic resource reserve for now, has 1.5 plus million in it. And then we have the historic reserve and the general reserve. The historic reserve is at 15,800, and that's because right now the majority of that money, or matter of fact, all the money that's allocated to the historic reserve goes to service the debt and the principal and interest on the debt for the town hall. So every year that money is used to cover the historic resource reserve. We also have a general reserve balance of 653,000, and there's approximately 1.3 million in what we call CPA undesignated fund balances, or even the CPA has this thing called free cash. If you take a look at what 11% equals in the community housing reserve, just to place this in perspective, it's approximately 350. I think it's really closer to 370,000 this year. And if we were to double it, we'd be allocating roughly 700 to 750,000 into the community housing reserve for future projects. Next slide, please. So you might ask, why are we doing this, and why do we want to earmark additional funds for the community housing reserve? And if you look at the town's 5-year capital plan and forecast, basically a forecast for CPA related projects, there's no specified amount in there in any of the 5 years going forward. And we know that there are projects out there. There's a footnote in the plan that talks about authorizing $2 million for some yet to be identified projects by the Needham Housing Authority. So we look at the Needham Housing Authority's program. They have a great report that they issued in 2019, which talks about what their planning is going forward. Members of the task force met with the Needham Housing Authority, and they talked to them. And basically, for those who don't know, the Housing Authority provides affordable housing to moderate and low-income families and individuals in the town. It manages over approximately 300 units of federally and state subsidized affordable housing units. Last year, and some of you may remember this, that we appropriated, and actually it was 120,000, that's a typo, for a, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. We funded a few years back $150,000 for the Needham Housing Authority to hire a consultant to identify future project and funding sources for the modernization redevelopment of affordable housing. The Housing Authority is moving forward with that, bringing the consultant on board. So they project that they'll be coming forward in the next 3 to 5 years looking for funds to do some of the projects that are listed here. And some of them, these come right out of their 2019 plan, which includes a construction of a new set of senior apartments on the over by Captain Robert Cook and Seabed Way, redevelopment of the homes up at the High Rock Estates, and also redevelopment of the Linden Chambers facilities. Next slide, please. Members of the task force also spoke to the folks in the Needham Affordable Housing Trust. The trust was established back in 2018 based on the approval of town meeting. Last year at town meeting, we approved a request for rental assistance money, and that was 120,000, I think was authorized, 20,000 of which went towards some administrative costs, and 100,000 plus 50,000 for Metro West were combined, and that program is in place, and it's providing much needed assistance to those folks who have been impacted by this pandemic, and also provides them with some rent relief to avoid having problems with their landlords and such. We talked, the task force talked to those folks about future CPA funding requests, and there was a couple that came up, a partnership perhaps to develop some subsidized elderly low-income rental units, and then also perhaps a project to provide buy-down assistance for down payments and closing costs for affordable housing units, for affordable housing for people in town who can't afford it. Again, these are projects that are down the road. Next slide, please. What the task force also did is they consulted with the Community Preservation Coalition about what other towns are doing in this area. And just to give you a flavor, the task force tried to pick out communities very similar to Needham. We're not the first ones to set aside some money for doing projects. Belmont set aside funds to enable the Belmont Housing Trust to act expeditiously on emerging opportunities that fit within the CPA guidelines. Concord put some money and held it in reserve for future community housing projects. They also did some contributions directly into the construction of an 83-unit assisted living facility. Lexington invested some funds into community housing on one of their sites. They also authorized funds to preserve, rehabilitate, and restore some of their housing assistance board units in town. Next slide, please. Sudbury used some money to fund the acquisition and creation of some community housing units. Cambridge, which spends a considerable amount of money on affordable housing, looked for funds to acquire a site for the development of the housing units, to create 23 new affordable rental units, and to provide financing again for eligible first-time home buyers. It's supplemental financing. And then Duxbury, last in this grouping anyways, did a lot of the same type of projects. So next slide, please. So this is basically what we're proposing, is to ordinarily where we have an 11% allocation of money into the affordable housing category, we're proposing this year, we take the first step of an installment in increasing the amount of money, earmarking this money by increasing the allocation into community housing reserve from 11% to 22%, which would increase our normal allocation. It's between 350 and 370 to somewhere between 700 and 750,000. By doing that, we're going to increase the community housing bucket so that when we do get the request from these folks at the Housing Trust and at the Housing Authority, we'll be in a position to approve them, and we won't be constrained by other projects that people are seeking funds for down the road. So it's a little bit of a shift in priorities, but we think it's necessary so that we have the money available when the requests come in, and we do expect those requests to come in. Next slide, please. And I think that's the last one. It is. So thank you, and questions, comments, welcome.
All right. Thank you, Rick. All right, so first for members of the committee, questions for Rick Zambone, comments. Okay, so thanks, Rick, for the presentation. We've just for the public, so they know we saw a pretty close iteration of this presentation at our last meeting, and we had some questions, so I think we've kind of fully aired that out. So now, members of the public. Daphne, do we have any members of the public who are interested in making comments or asking questions? Daphne, I think you may be on mute. Is that possible? Or am I not hearing? All right, is it Steve? Yes, Steve.
Hi again.
Hi, Steve.
Beautiful weather down here.
I love the background. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I'm actually in Florida, so.
Are you really?
Yeah.
I don't know. Can you lawfully participate in our public hearing that way? I'm wondering about
I don't see why not, being it's a Zoom meeting. But, you know, I mean, there might be some people talking from their summer home somewhere. Anyway, I would definitely rise to speak against this proposal at town meeting. I think that every proposal coming into the CPC should be weighted out, equally. If the housing group has come in with plans that they want to do something, they should be presenting them to you so that you have them and could bring them forward to town meeting. Otherwise, the money would be in the general fund, the same as everybody else. As it is this year, after this year, there'll be over $3 million sitting in the housing fund. If there's a $4 million request that comes in and there's money in the general fund, and when this committee looks at what it wants to present to town meeting, which ones is presenting, it might say, you know what, that $4 million request is really important, could be funded $3 million from the Housing Reserve Fund and $1 million from the general fund towards going forward. And that would be your option. But for you to prioritize one purpose over another, as far as locking or requesting to lock that money up aside for one purpose rather than any one of the other 3 or 4 purposes, 2 or 3 other purposes that the committee is authorized to provide funds for with the permission of the town meeting, then I just don't think that that's appropriate. I don't know why. Housing is great. I've spent my life dealing with housing. And I've talked to Scott Brightman many times about ideas to do with the Needham Housing Authority, but I don't think that you should be ahead of proposals, earmarking dollars for that purpose.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I don't know if any of the if the working group wants to respond to that in any way, but we thank you for your comments, just the same. If anyone wants to respond, let me know. You can put your hand up. Otherwise, we're going to take Steve's comment under advisement. That's the purpose of our public hearing. Someone has their hand up. Daphne, I can't hear you for some reason.
We were having a little technical difficulties in the beginning, so it looks like Reg Foster is raising his hand.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I can hear you now, Daphne.
You have Penny Kirk who has her hand raised among the board, but I will go ahead and promote Reg Foster.
Okay, and so Penny has her hand raised. We're going to give priority to committee members. So Penny, do you have a purpose for your hand being raised? Question or comment? Yes.
Yeah. I think that Rick's presentation is fabulous, but I think what he's trying to do is make this a little more fair. It looks as if the housing community has been the stepsister for years, and to not try to make it more equitable, I think is I understand Steve is saying you could get hold of the money somehow, but it seems to me this is an opportunity to make things a little more equal among the 4 categories.
Okay.
And certainly the housing authority is going to be needing a lot of funding because of some plans that are up ahead, and I'm sure that Reg could talk to that.
Okay, so why don't we hear from Reg Foster? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? So I've been on the CPC for many years before I moved on to be the chair of the Housing Authority, and Penny has taken over the seat. And I'm very familiar with Steve's, point of view and position, and it is a reasonable position to take. But the problem with it is that we've been studying and we've been preparing for this for several years. It's a big thing to do. And if we do not start setting aside funds that, in a year or 2 or 3, there won't be enough extra money in the general reserve to fund the level of expenditures that we're looking at right now, given the work we've done to date. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I want to just go to a brief presentation that complements what we saw from Mr. Rosenstock. Is that okay?
Yeah, just be cognizant of the time, the hour of the day and the time. Okay, good.
5 minutes. How's that sound? Let me just get the sharing go. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, for some time, the Needham Housing Authority Board has supported this kind of proposal, but it has never had the kind of support that I think is growing in this year. And the reason we've supported it is, we are the largest provider of low-income housing in Needham, as Steve outlined, 328 units. And there's another 128 units of Section 8 housing that we also provide, as well as a community residence for the Department of Mental Health. Right now, we're facing a very serious decaying and aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance problem that we've studied. 60 of our buildings are over 75 years old. You can see 25 are almost 60 years old. Our youngest buildings, 20 of them are 13 years old. Even the 40-year-old buildings are getting very long in the tooth and need substantial modernization if we're going to be able to preserve them as low-income housing for the next 50 years. And that's not counting things like they're not ADA accessible. The heating systems are very inefficient, no insulation, very small unit size. They're basically worn out. And we have 43 acres of land that really are not used very inefficiently in this day and age of lack of affordable housing, not just for low-income people, but people of any income level in Needham here. Steve made reference to the facilities master plan. Those of you who haven't thought we've done our homework here, I really encourage you to download a copy, which you can do from the Needham Housing Authority website. It's over 100 pages long and looks at our entire infrastructure and set of facilities and proposes a way forward, not only what can and should be done, but also a preliminary look at where the funding might come from. And that's really what we're all about here tonight. As Steve indicated, you can break it out in several different ways, but I put it down as sort of 5 projects here where that will build new units or modernize existing units. The total estimated cost a couple of years ago is $130 million for doing these projects. They've identified funding sources from other sources of about 125 million, but a key source of funding is right here, the CPA funding, almost $5 million. And you'll see that in all of the projects that Steve identified in other towns, where the essential sort of fill the gap funding comes from town CPA sources. Otherwise, you just cannot, create a financial structure for these projects that allows for low-income renters. The result of this concept, and this is a conceptual approach that we hope to start fleshing out this spring if COVID goes away and we can get started with this next phase, is that we'd have about 288 of our existing units completely rehabbed and ready to go, for the next 50 years, which is definitely not where we're at today. We would wind up with this conceptual plan with 121 new units of additional affordable housing. That's a 36% increase over what we provide today. As I said, the town CPA funds here is critical fill the gap funding. And you can see this in every one of these other towns that has gone down this path before us. The current community housing reserve, as Steve outlined in his chart, is 2.5 million right now. We have a potential need of nearly 5 million, and it could be more based on our study a year or two ago. And that isn't counting the kind of initiatives that the Housing Trust is thinking of doing as well. Increasing the set aside to 22% or $750,000 a year is I think a really prudent thing to do, given what we're planning to proceed forward with over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. And one of the things that I also know is very important to the CPC when I was on it and today is, you get tremendous leverage out of this $5 million. You can really attract all these other funds into town to modernize our existing housing stock and also potentially redevelop or develop new affordable housing in Needham. And if we go, set that increased amount aside over the next few years, in 2 to 3 to 5 years, there will be that amount of money in the affordable or community housing bucket where we can contemplate doing one or more of these sorts of projects. And again, I don't have insight into the Housing Trust. So that's what I have to say.
All right, that's great, Reg. Thank you.
Let me turn off my screen sharing here. There.
Okay, so thank you for that presentation. And the one thing that I just want to add, and maybe Rick may want to, and Reg may want to add this, because I think it's an important point to make, is that the Housing Authority is a separate entity. It's not a part of our town government, and therefore any large projects that we, with respect to the Housing Authority, could not be bonded. They would have to be paid out of cash. And one of the thoughts that I've heard, both when we've discussed this with both the working group and even in my discussions with the select board in their response to my consultation with them, was that increasing the amount in community housing was a way to around or to create kind of a savings account for future use in light of the fact that you cannot bond a project for the Housing Authority because it is not part of the town of Needham. Large projects, $1 million projects, are often bonded even by CPC, and a Housing Authority project could not be subject to that, per the advice that I've received many times from our Director of Finance for the town, Dave Davis. Okay, so any other comments from the working group? And if there are any other questions or comments from the public?
Mr. Chair, there are no more comments from the public.
Okay.
Yeah, Peter, I'd like to make just one comment.
Sure.
So we're talking about allocating future funds, let's call it, for these projects. As a CPC board or committee, it is our responsibility to decide what we're going to spend money on. So, for example, we can either do it in the open and say we are going to set aside money for this, or we can just simply not spend money on other projects. knowing that we'd like to have something in reserve, not borrow money for other projects so we can have something in reserve. So I see it as a very open thing to do, that we are saying to people, this is something that we would like to do for a town. This is how we would like to spend money in the future, and we would like to let you know we are going to do that, as opposed to simply not spending money on something because we know we want to save it for the housing down the line. I think it's a perfectly acceptable thing to do, because like I said, one way or another, if the town meeting says, no, we don't want you to do that, we can still as a CPC simply not spend money on other things because we know we want something for housing. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I understand some of the other views, opposing views, let's call it that, but I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. That's all I can say.
All right. Any other comments from the committee? No. And Daphne, just any other additional comments from or questions from the public?
No, there are no hands raised among the attendees.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I think that concludes it. I think well, there is a chairman's announcement component, and that is that I did consult with the select board, and I will be consulting with the finance committee a week from tonight. You were all provided with a copy of the memo that I provided to the select board, and so you should have a copy of that. So I think that the result of that consultation is kind of, one of the results is that Walker Pond is being funded through another warrant article in the town. The same goes with respect to the component of the Mcleod Field and components of the town reservoir, I believe. I have some sense, but I don't think that there's anything that's been resolved about the question of the balance of the funding for the design. I think that that's still a discussion and an issue to be resolved by the select board. So, but bear in mind, was I there last week? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was
so as a result of, I think as a result of us bringing all those issues forward, raising the issues with the various committees, we've had a discussion well in advance of town meeting. And so we'll be able to resolve those issues and have answers going forward.
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt you for a very quick procedural matter?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we close the public hearing.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So we're going to have a roll call vote on that.
Second that.
All right. So that motion to close the public hearing is Paul Alpert. Second
Bob Dermody.
Is Bob Dermody. We'll have a roll call vote. Thanks, Paul. All right. Mr. Alpert.
Aye.
Mr. Barnes.
Aye.
Mr. Crocker.
Aye.
Mr. Dermody.
Aye.
Ms. Dorfman.
Aye.
Mr. Gersel.
Aye.
Ms. Kirk.
Aye.
Mr. Zamo.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Okay, public meeting's closed. Thank you again, Paul. Okay, so I have nothing to add, but I've kind of summarized chairman's announcements. I think that's.
I have one quick thing.
Sure.
Can you see this? It's backwards. Never mind. It says, this is the Newton tab.
It's not backwards.
Oh, it wasn't
Oh,
back.
it's not backwards?
It's not backwards.
Oh, it is.
No.
Just
You
on
guys
your
see it?
laptop.
Yes.
EA funds go to House of Worship for first time.
You see they're funding 1.43 million for a tower in the church, in the Grace Church, Chapel Church in Newton.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to give before you disperse, give an update on something that I was requested to do, and that was go back to the Conservation Commission and ask them.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thanks, Ray.
Ask them about certain funding. So, perhaps not the best time to talk about setting aside funding, but the funding of $1 million has been that level for a very long time. And I must admit, I'm not sure how often the Conservation Commission has utilized that, but it's been at that level for a very long time. I suppose you can argue if the Conservation Commission was given $1 million every year that we never used, then we'd be owed a lot of money. That being said, it doesn't work that way.
That's not how it works.
That being said, we feel $2 million makes a lot more sense. Now, there was actually an example brought up. There was some property on Brookside Road, excuse me, and that was literally right next to the reservoir, or I'm sorry, technically, what is it, the Wellesley watershed? In any case, the watershed there, and it sold for $1.8 million. It was literally right on the shore. And it was that house that burned down a year and a half or so ago. And if we had some money, perhaps we could have done that and taken it out of the public use, as far as having a home right up against the watershed. So we feel it makes more sense to up it to $2 million. That gives us something which we can really use and search out and try to find something, and then not have to worry about where it's coming from. Again, it's been at $1 million for I don't know how many years now. Some people probably know better than I. It's been a very long time. But anyway, that's what came back from the Conservation Commission.
Okay, we have Rick Zimbone's hand is up. Rick?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just I understand where Artie's coming from. I know there's the Tippett House is up for sale. I'm not sure if people are aware of that, but the Tippett House and the land associated with it, I think the pricing is around $3.2 million.
Oh,
that's also on the watershed.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, wow.
So there are a number of there are a number of pieces of property that come up periodically like that, and that's not a comment one way or another in favor of it. That's just information purposes for the committee.
Well, that's a very interesting observation. No, I knew it.
All right. Well, can I give you my view on this, which is that first of all, the hour's late, and we're kind of late in the funding cycle as well. And really, we're going from, well, $1 million is a good placeholder to no, $2 million is a good placeholder. I think that we can have a discussion about that. I think we should have a fuller discussion about that. I don't think that we should be, and I think that can be the subject of if I would propose that it'd be the subject of a discussion in our next funding cycle, because I think that we've made assumptions and we're late in the cycle, and if the Concom has this was our effort at just getting some feedback from the Conservation Commission about whether or not they felt comfortable with the placeholder of $1 million. And this wasn't really an invitation to come back and say, no, we want it to be doubled. It's okay. Well, we're gonna have a discussion about this.
Interrupt you. Of course, it was an invitation to come back and give the opinion of the Conservation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. So then I think what we'll do.
It was an invitation to give input from the Conservation Commission.
Fair enough.
And so that's what we're doing.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So
Rick bringing up that thing about the Tippett House. Wow, that's actually a very interesting thing. And there isn't, I mean, we don't have a year, however the funding comes to be, we don't have a year as a town to decide what we want to do. If we do or do not want to do anything related to the Tippett House. So I do not think we should just let that sit. That comment from Rick, and the fact that it's up there, that a lot of people are talking about it right now. I think it's worth a discussion, fairly soon to be discussion, not just the CPC, but perhaps
it's probably not but remember it's not really a CPC discussion. It's really
it's a CPC discussion. If by chance there's some additional money besides the million allocated that could go to it, if it's even possible to go to it.
Right. Okay. Right. All right, Karis.
Right. I just wanted for some, I guess, clarity, and then just clarify a point myself. We're talking about how much to leave as a balance in the open space reserve. So it doesn't mean that other funds coming into the general reserve couldn't also be used for open space. It's simply what would be the lowest we would want that balance to become. And then the point of clarification is just on like real estate transactions in municipalities. They're not fast, just having experienced a few of them. So while I understand we usually have to take some action at some level of speed, but the negotiation component of it, because it has to be, you know, submitted to town meeting and all the other processes we have to go through, it does usually take some time. So I think if there are opportunities, starting to investigate them now isn't a bad thing, but just knowing that it would take some time in order to actualize it.
Well, as we, yeah, exactly, Karis. But as we know, what's interesting is the timing could not be any better. You can almost argue the timing cannot be any better. Is with real estate, because if someone's selling a property, they don't want to wait, 9 months for a town meeting to this, for town meeting to decide if there is a chance they're even going to do it. This isn't that at all. This is actually fairly quick.
There's no article on our town meeting warrant for purchasing property right now. And so it's not I don't believe it's an opportunity for this year's funding cycle.
Possibility.
All right, we have Paul Alpert.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been here before as a town where land has become available. And what generally will happen is that the Conservation Commission, when something like this drops into the lap of the Conservation Commission, they will be able to raise an amount of money to put down a deposit with a purchase and sale agreement, which is somewhere between 5 and 10% of the total purchase price. So if we're talking about a $2 million purchase, the town only has to come up with what could be a refundable deposit of $100,000 to $200,000. I mean, it would have to be refundable. That would be the deal. If it's not approved by town meeting, we get our money back. And if the seller wants to sell land for conservation purposes, they're very happy to do that. Those funds are generally readily available. One way, as I recall from being on the Conservation Commission now 6 years ago, is that there is a conservation fund that's under the control of the Conservation Commission, which can be tapped quickly. And another way is to quickly go to the Finance Committee to get funding out of the, tell me the fund, Rick, that would come out of the, that's controlled by the Finance Committee that they can quickly access in order to do something like that. But there is money available, short, small 6 figures, high 5 figures, small 6 figures that can tie up property. And it's been done before. I'm thinking of projects that were added to Ridge Hill, where the town has been able to do that. I can think of 2 projects added land to Ridge Hill since I've been a town meeting member, starting in 1998, where the Conservation Commission was able to do that.
Sorry, Paul, I was muted. It's the reserve fund.
Right.
All right, so that's some advice from a former member of Concom to the current member of Concom about a potential.
Well, and to the CPC,
And the
where, then they can come to the CPC and say, we want you to fund this purchase.
Right. Okay. Okay. With that, I think that's it. So our next meeting is on the 31st of March. And we should have some further updates about finalizing the various financial nits of these now 8 proposals. And we'll be voting. I guess we should probably plan on voting on the 31st. When you say, Karis? I think we're ready.
Yeah, I'd indicated we either be voting on the 31st or that first meeting in April.
Okay. We could take off all of April, get our work done in March.
That would be nice.
Hey, may I ask one quick question to Karis, or all of us? So we have a $1 million kind of set aside as a placeholder. Does that mean this $1 million as a placeholder can't be used for any expenditure at this point? Because there's no property, there's nothing available, there's nothing on the warrant article for property? or what does the placeholder mean at this point for that $1 million placeholder? Isn't it in the warrant article a $1 million placeholder?
So it's an internal application that we submit, and we basically submit it on behalf of the town. Should a piece of property during our hearing process become available, we're sort of, I guess, to Peter's point, we just closed our public hearing. So we're sort of at the very end of our application process.
I don't know if you said, okay, I'll play the role of Paul Albert here. I don't know that you're answering his question, but he's saying, tell me, you're saying, what is this $1 million? Basically, what's the $1 million? Well, so remember that restricted fund gets funded each year. So there's going to be another $350,000 slug into open space. What we've done is we've funded open space can now be used for recreational projects. Not all, I don't think, but for some, okay? And we've used that in the past. So in this funding cycle, we may use, we're gonna use some of that money to fund the town reservoir sediment removal. We had some discussion about potentially using some of that money for even the town green, but I don't think we're gonna do that. But so what you're doing is you're putting money in right now, say there's $1 million in that balance. You're putting money in and you're kind of taking some of it out, but we're always kind of keeping it at that level of, well, let's keep the balance at around $1 million. Okay, money's going in, some money's coming out. It's kind of like keeping an evergreen account of about $1 million, even though money's coming in and money's coming out.
I'm in search of I'm in search of anything that can help create this possibility of for the Tippett House. Anything. And Paul, your statement, your information has been extremely useful, and I have no doubt there's Rick and a lot of people have a lot of information that could possibly make this reality. And Rick, thank you. We all knew it was coming up. We all knew it was for sale now, at least most of us. And I think it's a tragedy that's going on, an absolute tragedy that's selling.
Okay, so with that, well, a motion to adjourn?
You have it.
Second.
Okay, so, all right, so that's Rick Zimbo makes the motion, and the second was by Bob Dermody. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it was by Chris Gersel.
And if I may add to the motion, congratulations to Karis. I don't think I was on when we were saying that earlier. Way to go.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Congratulations, Karis.
Great job.
Karis, thank you.
That's great.
We appreciate all your contributions too.
Yeah.
Harris, does this mean that you're going to be giving up your role for the CPC?
It does. I actually am hoping to bring on the person who took my role in Public Works, Cecilia Simchek. So she's actually watching today to get a feel for the committee. So I'm glad you were all on your best behavior, and we'll be transitioning probably through the summer.
I feel sorry for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she knows what she's getting.
Give us more.
I'll welcome Cecilia back. She was a recording secretary for a period of time when I was with the commissioner on the Needham Housing Authority. Okay.
And Daphne, thank you very much for your assistance tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did great, Daphne.
Yeah.
Still can't hear you though.
Yep.
Cecilia was brought in. There she is.
Cecilia.
I promoted Cecilia.
Oh,
It was a pleasure, everybody.
everybody's getting promoted.
All right. Welcome, Cecilia. All right, so we are going to do our roll call vote to close out the meeting. And alphabetically, Paul Albert.
Aye.
Joe Barnes.
Aye.
Marty Crocker. Bob Dermody.
Aye.
Laura Dorfman.
Aye.
Chris Gersel.
Aye.
Penny Kirk.
Yes.
Rick Zimbo.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. With that, the meeting is closed.
I like the flag, Bob.
On the 31st.
Good night,
Bob
everybody.
Dermody.
Good night.
Good
My
night.
favorite.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.